Good evening and welcome to the Harwood Union Unified School District School Board meeting for January 22nd, 2025. My name is Ashley Woods. We're calling the meeting to order at 6:01. The first round of business is, of course, public comment, and I see we have quite a list. Yeah, if you're at home in Zoom and you want to speak, please raise your hand. We only have 15 minutes, so, okay. There's the yeses.
We'll have to limit to
5. Yes, okay. We can, there's, let's see what's on. Can you see?
just edges.
Okay, so we have 6 people and we keep it to 3 minutes. So please remember that when you come up to speak, and we'll just go down the list. First is Robert Dabrowski. You can sit there and turn that mic on, and then our people in Zoom can hear you.
Here in support of the school nurses. I've got 3 boys at Waterbury, twins in kindergarten and 1 in first grade. So we've got 3 boys, and it's inevitable that they'll end up with injuries, and fairly often. If it weren't for our BPS nurses, some of their injuries thus far would have kept them out of school. Allison and Sophie, they love our children. They're dedicated to their craft, and it's what sets them apart. They're healers, they're teachers, they're counselors to our young boys. Additionally, as a volunteer at the school, it's easy to see how these heroes reach to the other children throughout the day. They provide guidance to our children, comfort when they need it. One of our sons had a partially amputated finger last fall, which required frequent dressing changes as well as bacterial ointments throughout the day. He was only 4 years old, was severely traumatized, and the nurses were there to provide physical care that he needed to remain in school. They provided him with not only the physical care, but helped him mentally with his healing as they talked about his injury and acknowledged his pain and suffering. This particular injury had an impact on all 3 of our kids, with him also being a twin. Allowing the twin to go to the nurses with his brother was a huge blessing. Knowing that the nurses were taking care of his twin brother helped him with his own coping. Allison and Soph allow our kids to vent, express their feelings, reassuring that their feelings are valid, their concerns are valid. As parents, our children don't always want to listen to us, but it's clear that they're calmed by knowing that the nurses are always there for them. Not only is it the big injuries and allowing our sons to get their prescribed medicines as necessary throughout the day, but it's also the little things. Seeing the other school children come into the nurse's office with a hangnail, a cut lip from chapped lips, a bee sting that one of our kids endured, the same previously injured finger. It's their compassion, their care that sets them apart. They build relationships with the children. They coordinate their care. They educate the children, and they support the emergency preparedness of the school. Luckily, we haven't had to deal with some of these major disasters that other schools have faced, but these care workers are pivotal in the crisis response and planning of in a disastrous event. These nurses significantly contribute to the positive and supportive culture at BPS, and we want to make sure that their unwavering compassion and support doesn't go unnoticed. With all the healthcare cuts that are happening in our community, especially the cuts in psychiatric care, we need these nurses more than ever. They're an integral part of the BPS team to ensure these children get a solid foundation to emotionally and physically success in whatever lies ahead of them. Thank you.
Very much. Steve Martin.
Steve Martin from Waterbury. There was an article in the Waterbury Roundabout on August 23rd of 2024 about the new 3-year teacher's contract, and the contract impacts the budget. So I want to make a comment clarifying a statement in that article. From the article, and I quote, The new 3-year contract covers approximately 220 teachers across all of the schools in the Harwood district. It will increase teacher salaries by an average of 6.5% over 3 years, unquote. It was not 100% clear to me what 6.5% over 3 years meant, so I contacted the finance director, who confirmed that the contract actually provided for a 6.5% per year increase over 3 years. Since increases compound as years pass, that means the total increase over the 3 years will be 20.8%. Other than the observation that last year the school administration and school board said they would need a little time to begin to reduce spending and then went on to improve this increase, it makes me wonder how they expect to cut spending. I'm in hopes that there will be some meetings to present the school budget and explain it to the public prior to town meeting. A few things are not clear to me in reviewing the January 8th budget update on the website. It appears that the budget requests a 2.75% increase in total education spending over last year. Last year, the approved increase was 5.44%. That would make the compounded request for the 2 years 8.3%. In comparison, Vermont seniors on Social Security received cost of living increases, 3.2% last year, 2.5% this year. The compound increase is 5.8%. So the request over 2 years is to increase the school spending at a rate 43% higher than the rate of income growth for the seniors in Vermont. I will leave my third point in comments for the board to read, but the education community seems to think there's not a spending problem, it's all in funding. I submit there's a problem in both spending and funding. And so I urge the school board to revise the current budget before town meeting. I will not be supporting the current budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Annalisa?
My name's Annalisa. I'm from Duxbury. I'm also a school nurse here at Harwood. The district nurse team is being asked to reduce the numbers of nurses by 1 to 2 positions. Reducing nursing staff feels short-sighted. We can't offer the same level of care with fewer nurses, and we want the community to understand what that means and what is at stake. This year, 95% of visits and check-ins result in a student returning to class. Studies show that without a nurse in the building, 11 to 15% of students are sent home. A study conducted in Massachusetts showed that for every $1 invested in school nurses, the community saw a $2.20 return. When a nurse is present, parents will lose less in wages. Teachers are more productive, and less money is spent on medical care. Reducing school nurse services puts the financial burden on families in an environment that is already being stressed is already seeing stressors from decreased medical access and rising insurance costs. What would it look like without a nurse in each building? Who determines if a student needs to go home when it could have been managed in the school? Dr. Mike said that each school needs their administrator in case of a school shooting, but a medical emergency is much more likely to occur. Who will have the knowledge to respond and determine what to do? What does it look like when there aren't enough nurses in each school? Some schools have more medically complex and high-need students. Last Friday, I worked alone and had over 50 student visits, and there was also a student who was on the edge of a medical emergency. This has happened on more than one occasion. How can one nurse be in 2 places at once? This is an equity issue. Not everyone has the same resources outside of school. If a child comes to school without their basic needs being met, we are often the first to be approached or brought in to help address the situation. We are often the first and only medical provider a child will see if they are sick. We are here to level a playing field that sets all children up for success. You take away the only medical access that some kids have, you are impacting their health outcomes with lifelong ramifications. This community knows what it means to lose health access with the closing of Mad River. Reducing nurses in schools only amplifies that. Thank you.
Very much. Anissa.
Hello, my name's Anissa Davis. I'm from Waterbury Center. I'm here tonight because we just heard that I found out a few hours ago that Harwood Gymnastics has the possibility of being cut. And Harwood has 25 members this year between middle school and high school, 20 middle schoolers and 5 varsity. The numbers have almost doubled. Of that, 13 eighth graders will be moving up to varsity next year. Of that 13, 8 do not do gymnastics year round. It's my understanding that a formula was arrived by using last year's number for gymnastics, which I believe does not do any justice to the program. Also, there was a statement that if there was not high school or middle school gymnastics, that there was still a club program for these athletes to compete in, and that is actually not necessarily true. And Harwood Middle School has been undefeated all last year and so far this year. They just had another record-breaking score of over 140 points. I've seen high school teams win states with 126 points before. Yes, there is club gymnastics for kids who start at 4 years old, train 4 to 5 days a week for 20 hours a week. They compete year-round. No, an average kid just starting out in middle school cannot compete in club gymnastics. Harwood Gymnastics has not held tryouts or made cuts to the team in over 30 years. I know because I've been coaching that long. Before that, I was a proud member of the Harwood Gymnastics team, and none of my team members were ever cut. Hockey, soccer, and skiing also have club opportunities, yet I do not see them on the chopping block. Title IX. Has anybody thought about this? Just wondering. The kids you will be taking away from the sports are the kids that need the sport. They are the kids that want to do other sports and not just one sport. It is the reason I gave up job opportunities in my 20s to be able to coach a school sport for young ladies who did not have an opportunity to pay for club sports. That is why when I worked very hard to open a club program, I continued to coach for Harwood because there are still 2 very different sports. What these young ladies get out of this is not just gymnastics. The team they become, the lessons they learn, how to win with honor and lose with grace, in a sport that they love, where it is safe to explore these things. You cannot put a price tag on that. You're talking about cutting a sport that will more than likely be state champions next year with a mostly freshman team. I also know that as the owner of Central Vermont Gymnastics Academy, where Harwood Gymnastics is hosted, the rates for the rent that is charged to Harwood Gymnastics has not been raised since we started in 2011. And I wonder if we can say that about every other sports program. That is also, I agree about the nurses. Just have to throw that out there. Seeing front lines, the students that come through the door, and what happens when there isn't a nurse there and who's left to deal with the children that still need something. It overworks everybody else. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ciliana? Am I saying that right?
Hi, my name's Liliana Martins. I'm from Waterbury, and I'm two-time middle school team captain for the gymnastics team. And as team captain, I'm speaking for myself and for many of my other teammates who couldn't be here tonight. I really dislike school, and I struggle a lot in school, but gymnastics really keeps me in line. It helps motivate me to keep my grades up. It keeps me out of trouble, and I become friends with all my teammates, which means I have more friends in school. Middle school gymnastics is very different than club, and as someone who does both middle school and club and has been doing gymnastics for almost 10 years, I feel qualified enough to say that the atmosphere is so different in middle school gymnastics. I believe it's way more focused on friendship and supporting each other. Club is also not easily accessible for everyone. It's very expensive year-round sport. It's a huge time commitment. I practice almost 20 hours a week with meets just about every weekend in state and out of state. And that does not fit everyone's schedule. Also in club, it's super difficult to keep up and do other sports. What's amazing about middle school gymnastics is it's not year round, so it's easy to do other sports and the practice schedule is flexible, which is really good. Gymnastics is the one thing in my life that I know I can always depend on. It had gotten me and my teammates through extremely hard times, and the possibility of middle school gymnastics getting it taken away breaks all of our hearts. Gymnastics helps so much with confidence, teamwork, friendship, discipline, communication skills, and learning not just to be on a team, but to be in a family. Those are all things that anyone can benefit from, and everyone deserves the chance to do gymnastics.
Thanks very much, you guys. And Kristen Martins.
Hi, I'm Kristen Martins from Moortown, Vermont. Sorry, as I composed myself, that was my daughter, Lily.
Well
Know
spoken.
what she was going to say, and so that there's a lot of emotion behind this, as you can see. I'm here to talk about gymnastics as well. Just while I gain my composure, I'm going to read something else from another mom, another parent that couldn't be here tonight, but asked for this to be shared. My daughter is in 8th grade and started only this year, and what a body positive experience and confidence builder this has been for her. And seeing her blossom at such an age where that can be challenging for a teen has been amazing. My daughter doesn't play basketball or ski, and it's upsetting to think that there will not be an alternative option for the kids that don't participate in the already limited number of team sport offerings in the winter. I understand that budgets are challenging, but supporting all student athletes is important, especially in a sport that promotes and requires core all body strengthening, a key element to successful everyday living and learning. Anissa is accepting of all levels and developing athletes at the Harwood team. I have been a parent of a gymnast for over 9 years now, and I see club. I know the commitment it takes, and not all students can do that. Not all kids can do that. It's not all parents can afford to do that. I know the sacrifice that that takes. Having this middle school team, as my daughter said, it helps give her a reason to be in school, be doing well in school because of those consequences of you have to. And it keeps her out of trouble. I know as a parent that she's at the gym. She's not going off and finding trouble in places and being in places she shouldn't be. It has helped with her confidence. It has helped with her get through so many things, and especially the middle school team where there's such an emphasis on supporting each other and teamwork. They're not only cheering for their own team, but if you go to a meet, which I don't know if any of you have been, you really should. They're fun. They'll be cheering for the other team. They might not know their names, but you'll hear them, "Go Montpelier." It's such a positive atmosphere, and our kids need that in their lives right now. We don't have a huge budget. I understand that. We're currently raising money for our own middle school leotards because they haven't been replaced in 15 years. They're leotards. They need to fit appropriately, and they have holes. They have rips in the seams. The elastic is completely stretched out, and we don't even have enough for our team because we have a large team this year. So we are fundraising efforts for that. So I know the budget is limited, but I don't think this is the way to go. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Thank all of you. We are listening. We don't respond to public comment as a rule, but we are listening, and we appreciate everyone here. So thank you very much. Okay, guys, we're going to move on to approving the agenda with one amendment we'd like to make. Do you want to talk about that, Steve?
Yeah, you can see in the leadership report that we'd like to schedule 3 community meetings to discuss the budget. They'll be on Tuesdays, one on February 4th, one on the 11th, one on the 25th, the first one being Zoom. But we do need the board's approval to hold these meetings. So should I make a motion then? Or okay, I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda to consider approval of the community outreach meetings.
Do I have a second? Dan seconds. Any objections or abstention to us adding that to the agenda? I'm not seeing any or hearing any. That will pass, and we'll add that. Yep. Add it to the action items. Okay, thank you. Okay, so with the amendment, can I have a motion to approve the agenda? That's working. There we go. Okay, JB makes a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, that Ben seconds. Anybody have a problem with it? Any objections or abstentions? Not seeing any or hearing any, we'll accept the agenda. In terms of board reports, for the leadership report, I would only highlight that we are still needing some board members from some different towns, specifically Duxbury, I believe, and probably still Waterbury. So if anyone knows anyone who might be interested in this kind of work or has any ideas for us, please convince those people to come join this really fun activity that we are doing. You're not giving a report this time, right? No.
I have.
You have your written. So Mike has the superintendent report linked. Does anyone have any questions for him or comments?
Happy to take questions on the report or anything else you want to ask.
Okay. Well, okay, not hearing any for that. Oh, go ahead, Mike. Life.
I appreciate your report. I appreciate the talk about immigration and schools' responsibilities thereof. I am wondering whether you are open. I'd like to hear from other board members, potentially having a conversation, possibly at the next board meeting, about looking at our district and schools as potential sanctuary schools. This is something that's in motion in Winooski. They're going to be voting on that soon. They've put out a model policy through the Education Justice Coalition of Vermont. I know that there's the Waterbury Congregational Church will be voting on something similar for that church this Sunday. I mean, actually, it's different because in that case, they potentially would actually house people. For schools, I think it's, from what I can tell from the model policy, it's really around information sharing. And, you know, generally these things say we will do everything within legal limits to avoid sharing information unnecessarily about our students and things like that. It seems important for us to take a stand on this. And so love to hear if this is something we could potentially bring up at the next meeting.
And that is the guidance we've received, and the guidance I've received as a superintendent for many years, that we don't share information. We educate all students regardless of where they're from. That's federal and state law, and that the only thing we would comply with is someone who would come in with an actual warrant. But the question of a policy, what you're talking about, I'd love to take a look at it. And it sounds similar to what we're doing as a school, and so that would be really a question for the board and what the board wants to do. But I would have no issues with looking at that.
Why don't we talk about that after, and we can talk about making it an agenda item? Okay. JB, do you want to give us a little update on building and use?
So the Building Use and Visioning Committee has met 3 times over the last month or 5 or 6 weeks. We were presented initially with 10 or so options at reconfiguration of the district. The themes that were guiding those, or the factors in consideration for those options, stemmed from surveys for the admins across the district. So the Facilities Committee provided some feedback on those driving factors, wanted a couple more items to be considered. We had a very good meeting last week where we went through all the options and decided to settle on a few to recommend for further evaluation. But I think Cam and David have done a really good job, and I think they will be presenting these options to the full board. So.
Okay, that's our update from board reports. The first section of discussion is Cam and Dave coming up to talk to us about our what we've been talking about. We've and I will stress that this is all hypothetical. Every single scenario, yes. Sorry, Mike, I forgot about you. Do you want to make an update? My bad.
I'm not sure how you could ever forget about me, Ashley. That's okay. Just real quick on the finance committee, and I appreciate everybody that came to speak tonight. And I just want to clarify. I'm not sure how everybody learned about tonight's meeting regarding gymnastics and some other discussions about basketball. But the finance committee had discussed this possibility at our last meeting last week, and there was a really good conversation with Ian, the athletic director, regarding the possibility of moving basketball at the middle school level and gymnastics to a club level sport. And there is some significant cost savings with both of these options. I know Lisa is going to talk about a little bit more tonight. But one of the options, or one of the things we talked about, was moving middle school basketball to the mini metro program. They actually approached the school district and are interested in taking over basketball for the middle school level. And that potentially has a savings of around $25,000. And that's something that the finance committee definitely wants to explore. And our recommendation, as far as that goes, is to just study it a little bit more. It sounds like it's a great idea. There were some concerns regarding transportation and costs, and families can't pay, how that all works. But there's other things like equity, logistics. But overall, the finance committee thought it could work out very well. It could be a good alternative to at least being able to keep basketball at the middle school level in some form. Gymnastics, and I know Lisa can get into a little bit further in her presentation, could be a potential savings up closer to around the $16,000 level. And so these are numbers that, if there's an alternative to still keep the programs, but to just move it to a club sport, that's a consideration of the finance committee and any sort of recommendation. So while we're not officially recommending that we 100% do this, there certainly was some interest in just looking into this a little bit more, and seeing what happens. It was a short turnaround time when this was brought to our attention. We certainly want to hear public feedback and parent feedback. I have a stepchild in mini metro and middle school, so I know what that means. Other parents may not know what that means. They would be responsible for transportation. That's something that we have to think about. So that's kind of where we're at with that. So I hope that clears up any sort of confusion. And I know Lisa will be talking about this a little bit further in her presentation later. That's all I have.
Great, thanks, Mike. I just want to stress before we start this discussion, and I will get to you, Grady, is that these are hypotheticals. Everything we're talking about with Cam and Dave, these scenarios and options that we've been looking at, there's been no choices made. There has been no choice about closing anything. We are really just talking, and we keep getting it bounced back to us that it's scaring everyone. And the last thing we want to do is scare the community about sports being cut, about things that may not happen. So I just want everyone to know that not only are we all not people that join the school board to cut jobs, not a single person here, but the reality is that we're in this job right now. And the job is hard, and the job involves looking at and discussing and working on all these different options. So I just want everyone to know, when these gentlemen talk to us, these are hypotheticals and ideas, just ideas, okay? Thanks. So I'd like to welcome Cam and Dave from Truex Cullens, who have worked with Harwood for a very long time in many of our schools and on many projects. I have personal experience with them, and with the Warren School and other things, and I can say they're very gentlemanly guys who are working very hard for us right now, and I really do appreciate them. So I'm going to turn it over to them, and we're going to hear about the options that we on the building use committee have been seeing in the board a little bit, but now we're going to hear a little bit more of a refined version from these guys. So welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. So we prepared a slide deck, which I think was linked in the agenda. We're going to walk through that. We'll try and get through it in about a half hour and then leave 30 minutes for questions, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. But it's a lot of information. We're going to apologize ahead of time. This will be a little bit like drinking from a fire hydrant, but we'll try and break it down as simply as we can. And I think I have a clicker. Let's see if it works. Yeah. Oh, there we go.
Is it possible to hide the window in window? Because these slides are fairly data rich.
We can. All right. Well, here's the agenda. We're just going to talk a little bit about the process, schedule, some of the themes that have arisen in terms of planning goals, the capacities of the existing buildings. Then the bulk of this is going to be running through the planning options, and then talking about cost modeling, where we are now and where we want to get to, and then we'll take questions. Well, there's some questions I think the board needs to consider. That's what that bullet item is, and then we'll talk about next steps, and then of course we'll get to your questions. And I'm going to see. Oh, it's not working. Can you forward the next slide, Mike? So this is the schedule. We started in November, mid-November, and we started with some very detailed questionnaires that we sent out to the educational leadership teams. There was basically all of the elementary school principals, middle school principals, and high school principals, and they filled those out. Then we met with them, and so the planning goals that you'll see on these different the different options came from the educators. So that's and it's a question as to one of the questions we ask is that should the themes that we're going to talk about become the planning guidelines? We have assumed they were. They've been very helpful in terms of trying to understand each option, and we'll talk more about that as we go forward. We also analyzed all the existing buildings. We created what we call for the elementary schools a minimum space program, which talks about what kind of spaces do you need in the school based on the educators' feedback, and then we've been assessing each school relative to those needs, and that all has funneled into a cost model, which talks about for each option how much how many additions or how big should the additions be on each building, if they're needed at all, and that is all part of the overall goal. Can you go to the next slide, please? And I'll talk about the overall goals. I don't know, interesting. It's a long transition. The goal, one way to think about the goals of master planning is balancing operational efficiency with educational effectiveness. And so we're looking at both sides of that scale, and hopefully we'll see that in a second. Okay. So the the idea is that, at its core, um, the goal of the school district is to educate, to be educationally effective and educate this kids here in the district. But we want to do that as efficiently as possible. And so we're not just looking at um, how do we reduce costs, we're also looking at how do we maintain and even improve educational effectiveness. And it's interesting because there are some of these items that you'll see in the themes when we talk about which actually do both. Sometimes these two ideas are in tension, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes creating operational efficiency actually increases educational effectiveness, and we'll talk a little bit about that more. Um, so can we go back a few slides? There we go. Yeah, this is good. So some of the themes that came out of the questionnaires, can we go back to the first one? The there we go. So, people were generally concerned about travel times. If you close schools, it can result in longer travel times. So the educators felt, these were some of the guidelines they would felt were important. 45 minutes maximum for elementary school students, 60 minutes for middle school and high school. The next one is a big one, equitable access to similar types of program offerings. So the idea that throughout the system, kids had access not to the exact same programs, but the similar types of program offerings and the same richness and variety. Next slide, please. This was a surprise to us, but we're seeing this in multiple districts around the state. Is this idea that preschool is very specialized, the training, the space, and it would really be beneficial to have centralized preschools, one each for the Valley and one for Waterbury Duxbury. One side note is that full day pre-K 4 may be required soon or in the future by Vermont law. So, that's a space need that you don't currently have that may be coming down, may be coming. Currently, there's a pre-K in each school, so this is a change. This is another big one that the elementary schools would be K4 or K5, and there would be 2 sections per grade minimum. Right now, all of your schools, except for Brookside, are 1 section per grade, meaning 1 first grade, 1 second grade, 1 third grade, so on and so forth. Aggregating, creating larger schools is one of these items that I was mentioning that is both creates operational efficiency and is more educationally effective. When you get a 2 section per grade school, you can start to have a full-time nurse, a full-time librarian. You can start to staff. You get efficiencies with your support services. So this was a recommendation by the educational leadership in the district. Next slide. For the middle schools, what we heard was 1 middle school for the Valley, 1 for Waterbury, Duxbury, but more importantly, consistent grade configuration between the two. There appears that there are different when students get to high school, because they have very different experiences at the 2 middle school. There's a difference in readiness. Both in both directions. Some advantages for the Valley students, some advantages for CrossFit Brook students. Next slide, please. Not much in terms of change with the high school. obviously science and the STEM labs are a priority, and have been for many, many years. There was some talk about moving central office into the high school or HCLC, and that's still to be determined. Excuse me. Next slide, please. This is another interesting finding was because there's a moratorium on alternative school charters, and it's far less expensive for the district to provide these kinds of programs in school as opposed to sending kids to these therapeutic schools. Having an alternative program, one in the Valley and one in Waterbury, Duxbury, for at each level, elementary, well, for elementary school, and then one per district for middle school and high school, was a recommendation. Next slide, please. So we calculated the capacities at the schools, and we did this using the state board maximum per grade. You can see that in the red box. So that what that is 20 students from K through 4 and 25 from 5 through 8. And that, of course, that's not the ideal, but we're just trying to understand maximum capacity. And what we did was we looked at every room that was being used as a classroom. And if there was a number of, if there was a classroom used by 3 special educators or 2, we said, okay, that's not a classroom because those people need space. And then we used 35 square feet per student for all of the grades and 50 for kindergarten and middle school and high school science. And you'll see, Brookside is by far the largest in terms of the elementary schools, followed by Waitsfield and Warren, and Moortown, all very similar, with Facein being the smallest. The Harwood Middle School, you'll see, this is important, is its capacity right now, if you don't count any high school spaces, 166, just classroom-wise. In a number of these options where we try to increase the size of the Harwood Middle School by either going 6 to 8 or 7, 8 for all the whole district, there's definitely a size limitation that would have to be accounted for, and so that's a TBD. Next slide, please. So we're going to run through the options now. I'll introduce the option, and then Cam will talk about some of the data that we've gleaned from it. So this option is option 0. This is just the status quo, no changes. And you can see in each option, you'll see we did a little report card on the left, whether it met the planning goals. So here you can see it, does it have one preschool in the Valley and one in Waterbury, Duxbury? No. Does it have, are the schools 2 sections per grade in the Valley? No, you can see the sizes there. They're much smaller. Does it have one Valley and one Waterbury, Duxbury Middle School? Yes, but they're not aligned. And then the high school, really, there's not much to talk about. As I said, moving HCLC back into the building, which is an alternative program, and moving central office in the building is still to be determined. And we have not done, or really the district has not done any analysis of, the travel time on buses. So that could be something that would happen in the future. Cam, do you want to talk a little bit about just some of the findings in the notes column?
I apologize for interrupting. I don't think the Zoomers can hear him speaking.
Oh, is that better?
That
Okay,
is-
my
yeah.
bad.
Thank you.
Is it working now?
I can hear your voice, but but then it stops.
How about now?
Now it's,
Can you hear me now? Okay.
yeah.
It's like a cell phone commercial from the 2000s. This option has the benefit of, or I'm sorry, has the detriment of having the most deferred maintenance. I will stop right now and just say that deferred maintenance is, we're using placeholder formula from the Association of Physical Plant Administrators for this district. We have not done detailed facility evaluations, which is what you would need to really know for sure what the deferred maintenance is. However, we ran the numbers. We do have detailed information about the Harwood building because we've done that facility evaluation and we've been working on building a scope of work for this building, and they lined right up at Harwood. We also favored the Warren School because our firm worked on a significant renovation of that project only 6 or 7 years ago, and it has a brand new envelope, a lot of mechanical work, and a lot of work has been done there. So the APPA standards and that methodology really applies to schools that have not had a major renovation or are 20 to 25 years old or older. So that's a caveat. That data should be determined at some point. More detailed understanding of the actual deferred maintenance needs would be recommended before any decisions are made. But that being said, it's a placeholder for now, and we think that it's in the ballpark. Because all of the schools remain open, this option, regardless of how much it really is, will have the most deferred maintenance. It also needs the fewest additions because you're not changing anything, and it has therefore a total assumed construction cost ranking of 1 out of 13. Essentially, there are 14 options. There are 13 different total amounts, so this is the least cost.
Next slide, please. It's a little deceiving too because we're in these other options. There's work being done to the buildings to, if they don't have an art room, we're saying, okay, they need to have an art room in this future configuration because we're master planning, and we haven't really applied that to the status quo. So it tilts it a little bit. So option A is the easiest way that we've found to think about these options is what happens to the Valley Elementary schools, what happens to Brookside, and what happens to the middle schools. It's kind of, if you break that down into 3 chunks, it sort of helps with the brain damage because there's a lot of options. So this one is the Fayston Elementary School is repurposed, and those students are divided and sent to Warren, Waitsfield, and Moortown. And there's really no other changes. And this one, the elementary, we do not meet the planning goal of creating larger, the elementary schools that meet a 2-section per grade school. Now, the elementary schools are slightly larger. You can see on the bottom right, Moortown has 158. Now, these are all using 2024, 25 data as of October 2024. So, they're hypothetical numbers because, every day the enrollment changes. But just that's where those numbers came from. So we don't achieve the 2-section per grade school. We do have 2 middle schools, one in the Valley, one in Waterbury Duxbury. There's no alignment, though, of grades. And so that's option A. Next slide, please.
So option A, a couple of notes. It does require classroom additions for the pre-K at Waitsfield, and it would require additions to meet the program service equity guideline. The total square footage of the district goes up fairly significantly by doing this. And you can see we don't yet have an understanding of the projected 30-year savings, but we'll get to that. It's 6th out of 7 for deferred maintenance, so it's on the higher side of things. Although only 3 out of 12 for additions, so it's one of the less bulky options for additions, which gives you a total of 11 out of 13 for the total construction cost ranking.
Next slide, please. And just to talk a little bit about the cost savings, we do have Lisa Essler is modeling the changes to salaries and benefits and other operational issues for each one of these schemes, which is no easy task. So thank you, Lisa. And so we have that right now. Hot off the press, we just got it today. Those figures for option B, which we'll talk about in a second here, but we're hoping in the next few weeks to get the other schemes have that modeling done and be able to report back, because sometimes even though the construction cost might be high, on the high side, the operational cost, if it results in operational efficiency, as you'll see when we show you some of the graphs that we've developed, can really offset the expenditures to facilities you can save with operations. And so let's get into option B. Sure.
Just before we get too far on comparing stuff, can you just explain the cost rankings again? I'm having trouble understanding what deferred maintenance ranking means, and also why some, the denominators are all different. Why
Yeah.
7, 12?
Yeah, it's a little confusing. So deferred maintenance would be all the work that needs to, all the outdated systems and that you have in the buildings, and the work that's required to get that done. Because there's 7 buildings, when you take one building offline, then you reduce that. If you keep all 7 buildings, then that's a higher number. If you take buildings offline, then you reduce that number. Now it's not always, some buildings like Brookside has and Harwood have much higher deferred maintenance because they're much bigger buildings and older. So that's how that's how that ranking works.
So what happens is there are 14 different planning options, but there are not 14 different totals. And we can adjust this if it's not intuitive or people are not understanding, but essentially what happens is there are like 5 of these options that are tied for third because they all close the same 2 buildings, for instance. Right, so you make the assumption about deferred maintenance and how much it will cost to basically modernize that old building. That's another way to talk about deferred maintenance the Association of Physical Plant Administrators may refer to that as capital renewal, where you've got an aged asset, and in order to make it up to current codes and modern standards, it has to the deferred maintenance has to be addressed through capital renewal. So there's only 12 different totals for additions because there are not 14 different permutations. So some of the ranks you'll see that a couple of these options are tied. Or you actually can't see that. I can see that because I can see all 14, but I just said instead of number 11 or 12 being 12, it's going to be 10, 11, you know what I mean? That's, yeah.
Slide, please. Okay. So option B is sort of similar. There's a thread with these options where we, there's sort of an evolution. This one is where two schools in the valley are repurposed, and those students go to Waitsfield and Warren. But there's no change to Brookside, and there's no change to the middle school. So now the elementary schools get a little bigger, right? Because there's more students there because we've repurposing two schools. So Warren has 206 K through 6 students, and Waitsfield has 251. There's quite a few pre-K students in the valley. 96 is the count we have. So, one of the things we haven't looked at is, because the goal, you could, for example, put the pre-K in Facein, or in Moortown, and we haven't. That would be another sub option. Next slide, please.
So, back a slide. So option B would require a classroom addition at both Waitsfield and Warren. And it would require an addition at all the elementary schools for program and service equity, although the addition at Brookside is very minor. But we're just trying to apply the same logic across all the options so that we're not playing favorites. In this case, the square footage goes up slightly to, I'm having trouble reading it, but I think 418 or so. And in this one, we have projected 30-year savings. The way that, and we have a graph to explain this later in the presentation, but the way this works is we say, you can't do these repairs, you can't make these additions without borrowing money. That money comes at a cost. You pay those back. It's usually in the form of a municipal bond. Then you pay that bond back over a period. In this case, we're saying it's 30 years. 20 and 30 years is typical bond repayment windows. So that becomes our time horizon to think about these things. And it becomes a way to say, well, what's the potential savings over 30 years? You move the kids around, you make the changes at the schools that you need to make, you achieve some operational savings by shuffling and revising staff. And then as time marches on, those bond payments either stay the same or they go down over time. But the cost to operate the district, your salaries, your benefits, your fuels, and also things like ongoing maintenance and repairs, those costs escalate because they're not locked in like a mortgage the way a bond payment would be. So you achieve some savings in year one, and then those costs are escalated over that bond repayment period. So this is a hypothetical model that suggests that closing these two schools and addressing all of those needs for program and equity would achieve a projected 30-year savings of $107 million over that 30 years. You can see that the deferred maintenance option in this ranks 5 out of 7. Additions is 3 out of 12, is a lower on the lower end, and the total cost is a 6 out of 13. So it's kind of middle of the pack as far as construction cost goes. Next slide.
B1 is a variation. In this case, the same in the Valley schools is similar, except they're pre-K 4 now, and then all 5th, 6th graders go to Crossed Brook, and all 7th, 8th graders go to the Harwood Middle School. No change to Brookside. So in here, this one goes a little bit backwards in terms of Warren and Waitsfield now are smaller than they were in the last scheme because we're only pre-K 4, not pre-K 5 or 6, whatever it was. And also the middle school at Harwood gets bigger because now it's taking all of the seventh, eighth graders in the whole district, and that's 260. And if you remember, the capacity was about 166. And, we haven't done an analysis of whether they could take over some of the space in the high school. For now, we've assumed that they can't. So it does, in this case, Brookside is sufficient size. The Valley schools are small. It does meet the criteria of one Valley and one Waterbury Duxbury Middle School, and it does align. Every student is getting the same experience. All pre-K 4s for elementary school. All students are at the same school for 5, 6, and all students are at the same school for 7, 8. So it does meet that idea of alignment of grades and opportunity. Next slide, please.
So we'll try and burn through these because we could go on forever. But this requires a classroom addition for pre-K at Waitsfield, and it would require an addition at all the elementary schools for program and service equity. It would require a classroom addition at Harwood Middle School as well. The total square footage is higher again on this one, 453 and change thousand square feet. And it's one of the highest cost options related to construction cost, because it has both on the higher side for deferred maintenance, on the higher side for additions, and the most expensive overall in terms of construction cost.
One of the reasons why under stats we're tracking the total square footage and the square footage per student is because it's directly linked to this idea of efficiency and in any in any future scenario, right now there's no school construction aid, but in the past they would only participate for, like, say, an elementary school, 142 square feet per student. They'd pay 30%. They would take that number, multiply it by a square foot cost per square foot, and pay 30% of that. So if you have the option as a district of saying, well, we want to provide 200 square feet per student, but you have to pay 100% of that difference. So what we're trying to do is track what the square feet per student is, what the total square footage is, and to see which one is the most efficient, because that's going to pay benefits down the road. Next slide, please. So option C is the way to think about this one is trying to basically take the model for Waterbury Duxbury and mirror that for the Valley. So one pre-K through 4 school. So Waitsfield right now is the school we've designated, and mostly that's because it's centrally located and has the most potential to be able to put additions on it. There's some issues with some of the other schools that make that harder. So creating one pre-K through 4 school in the Valley, which mirrors Brookside, and then the middle school would be 5-8, same as across at Brook, and then of course the high school. This does achieve many of the goals. You can see the report card on the left that in terms of the planning goals. So we thought this was intriguing. Next slide, please.
So this option would require a classroom addition at Waitsfield. Again, additions to all the schools for program and service equity, and a classroom addition at Harwood Middle School as well. we're starting to see the total square footage go down in the district here for this one. But you can see it's on the higher side of construction cost ranking. It ranks 12 out of 13 for total costs. Although it's in the middle of the road for deferred maintenance, it's on the high side for the cost of additions because you would require fairly large additions in order to achieve these this reconfiguration.
It's worth noting that um, this one could see operational, salaries and benefits could come down because there's less, there's fewer number of buildings, and so we're eager to see those numbers so that we can put together the total cost model for each scenario. Next slide, please. So in the valley, this option has two K through 5 schools, with Waitsfield being a pre-K through 5. Crossett Brook is, well, and with Brookside, this is now a pre-K 5. And the idea was to create so that Crossett Brook would be 6-8 and Harwood would be 6-8. So now one of the things about this is that there's Crossett Brook and Harwood are very similar in size, 195 students each. That is underutilizing the Crossett Brook building, which is why we also did a D1, which helps to try and correct that. The Moortown and Waitsfield school that's created is at Waitsfield is of sufficient size at 216, but Facein and Warren, when you combine those, are at 171. So that does not meet the planning goal of 2 sections per grade. And I should say that the planning goals are there may be an option that one of these options that doesn't meet the planning goal but results in great operational efficiency, may not meet one or more, and that'll be a decision point for the board as to, does the gains in operational efficiency offset, the fact that the middle schools, let's say, don't align, which is one of the harder things to achieve. Next slide, please.
So similar to others, this would require a classroom addition at Waitsfield. It would require an addition at all the elementary schools for program and service equity. I should say all the remaining elementary schools, and a classroom addition at Harwood Middle School. The total square footage is on the rise here at 422,000 square feet. And the cost ranking is middle of the pack. It's a little higher than the median for deferred maintenance, a little lower than the median for additions, and right in the middle for the total cost of construction ranking.
Next slide, please. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but basically, this was just a little sub option because one of the issues when you at Brookside is at capacity now, and if you add a grade there, it's problematic. There are some issues like with the cafeteria being too small, and it'd only be exacerbated if you tried to add more students there. So one solution or one idea that we had was if we were going to add 5th grade to Brookside would be to create a pre-K center at Crossett Brook in one of the in the lower level, and so that's what D1 is, and it's basically an attempt to solve the Brookside issue of and get the alignment we were looking for. Next slide.
As David said, I won't beat the horse too much, but it's this just makes it slightly more efficient by better utilizing Crosset Brook and by limiting the amount that would have to be added to Brookside. And you can see it does a little bit better than the last one in terms of construction cost ranking. This one's on the lower side of additions, a little bit higher on deferred maintenance because you're still retaining 5 out of 7 buildings, but it's now in the lower third of total overall construction cost ranking.
Please. So E, in terms of the valley, is very similar to some of the other options. There's 2 pre-K 5 schools in the valley. In this scenario, all 6th through 8th graders are at Crosset Brook for middle school, and Brookside becomes a pre-K through 5. Harwood remains 9 at 12. So this one has the does provide all the middle schoolers with the same experience, but it does have that problem that it overloads Brookside. And just so everybody knows, our charge from the district and the committee was to iterate as many options as we could. Like, just go for it and come up with as many different options that make sense. And then we met, and we can talk about what some of the options the committee, the building use committee, is leaning towards. But that's kind of where this all came from. Next slide, please.
Yeah, we're trying to leave no stone unturned here so that people can make informed decisions with as much data as possible available. Similar to the others, this would require classroom additions, though it would need classroom additions for pre-K through 5 at both Warren and Waitsfield, and the same program service equity spaces would need to be added to other elementary schools, and a minor addition at Crosset Brook, because it's just on the cusp of having that capacity. It's on the higher side of things for construction cost ranking, both because it's got more deferred maintenance, it's got a significant amount of additions, so you end up with a rank of 10 out of 13. Next slide.
So once again, the Valley elementary schools is very similar to previous schemes. Two schools. What's different here is that in this scenario, Brookside school is closed, and those students go to Crosset Brook, and that would be pre-K through 5, and then all middle schoolers would go to Harwood 6, 8. This does, once again, the elementary schools are all aligned. So this is a good one in terms of alignment, because all elementary schools are pre-K through 5. All middle schoolers are together, and in a 6 through 8 scenario, the schools in the valley are a little on the small side, but not too bad. It does, originally, when we met with the educators, they were contemplating one Valley and one Waterbury Duxbury Middle School. So if that in fact is a planning goal, then it does fail that, because there's one middle school. But I think their bigger concern, it seemed at the time, was the alignment of grades and opportunity for those middle school students. Next slide, please.
So this one's a little different. It does require a classroom addition for pre-K through 5 at Waitsfield and pre-K classrooms at Warren. To reach program service equity, there would be additions at all the remaining elementary schools. It would require a fairly significant classroom addition at Harwood Middle School, and requires reconfiguration at Crosset Brook Middle School, which is the cost it would be to be determined there, but it would be far less substantial in all likelihood than additions. But it's not exactly set up to be an elementary school. It's built as a middle school. So there'd be some stuff that would have to happen. This one, you're closing now 3 out of 7 buildings, and Brookside is a big one. Brookside is a very large and older building. So this has a low deferred maintenance score, although it needs a lot of additions. In terms of the construction cost ranking, though, overall, this one sugars out as the best.
Please. So once again, in the valley, the elementary schools are, it's very similar, closing 2 schools, creating 2 pre-K through 6 schools. Um, this one also contemplates closing Brookside, and instead of so essentially instead of pre-K 5 schools, it's the same option really as the previous one, but instead of pre-K 5 schools, 3 of them, there's 3 pre-K 6 schools, and so Harwood is 7 and 8 for the whole district. So it's very similar. The one issue is that now there's 432 K through 6 students at Crossett Brook, which is it's not clear. I believe, Cam, you'll speak to whether it needs an addition to accommodate that. Next slide, please.
Similar to the other schemes, this would require classroom additions for Waitsfield and Warren, and additions for program service equity at all the remaining elementary schools. It would require a classroom addition at Harwood Middle School, and it would require a reasonably significant addition at Crossett Brook, because now we're well over the capacity. You can see that it's in the lower third of construction cost ranking overall. It requires the most additions, however, has a lower score for deferred maintenance because, again, we're closing 3 buildings.
Next slide, please. So G1 is similar, except instead of 2 pre-K through 6 schools in the valley, there's 1. So this creates that, 1 pre-K 6 at Crossett Brook, 1 in the valley, and then middle school 7, 8 for the whole district. You can see that the number of schools, number of students in is similar between Crossett Brook would be 432, Waitsfield would be 457. So these are 4 or 5 section per grade schools that would be created. Interestingly, the PICUS report is, which the state commissioned and talks about educational effectiveness. They're recommending schools between 350 and 500, which they in the report talk about the difficulty of achieving that scale in Vermont. But that's their recommendation as for optimum elementary school size, which is just, in this state would be a lot, on the larger side for elementary school.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
In option G1, there's just 1 middle school. Is that right?
Correct. This is 1 middle school
just in
at
the
Harwood
in
for 7th and 8th students.
In the
And
left column, you have 1 Valley, 1 Waterbury, Duxbury Middle School. Is that
Catch.
just
Yeah.
It doesn't pass that.
right, it doesn't meet that requirement, which once again, it's the sense we got from the educators was more about the alignment of, they felt there needed to be a Valley and a Waterbury Duxbury Middle School only because it was more of a political judgment on their part. What was more important to the educators was that there was alignment of grades and opportunity for the middle school students. Next slide, please.
Yeah, I think there's history there on the middle school issue. So option G1 does require classroom addition for pre-K through 6 at Waitsfield. It requires a classroom addition at Harwood Middle School, and it would require a classroom addition at Crosset Brook as well. Although, interestingly enough, this model by quite a margin has the lowest total square footage in the end because you've gone from 7 physical plants to 3. And one of the things that happens, I won't spend a lot of time talking about this, but when you have 100 kids in a school, they need a gym. When you have 200 kids in a school, they need a gym. When you have 400 kids in a school, they need a gym. And gyms are big, and cafeterias are big, and kitchens are costly. So when you get more kids into one building, you get better efficiency of space because you need fewer of these larger assembly spaces as a total. Right now, you have 7 schools, you have 7 gyms. In this, you'd have 3 schools or 3 campuses and probably 4 gyms. So that's where some of these efficiencies come from. This one has, again, lowest deferred maintenance because you're closing the most buildings. However, it requires almost the most amount of additions in order to accomplish because none of these buildings would be large enough to accommodate this reconfiguration. However, overall, it has it's on the lower end of total construction cost ranking.
Next slide, please. Well, you'll be very pleased that we're not showing you H and J. So option K is a variation on previous ones we've seen, and it's really just more about different percentages from still 2 Valley schools, but different percentages going to Warren and Waitsfield, and then students from Moortown who live on the northern edge of Moortown, who are actually closer to Brookside, would go to Brookside. This results in, the elementary schools are, this one was a little bit lopsided because only 107 students at Warren and 247 students at Waitsfield. So the next one, if we can go to let's just skip right over to K1. We redid the percentages to kind of balance the schools. Still only 150 at Warren and 204 at Waitsfield. And if you go to one more, 2 more slides. It took us 3 tries to get it right, but what we did was all of the facing kids going to Warren, and then 67% of Moortown kids going to Waitsfield, and the rest going, and that balanced the schools pretty well. Warren would have 206, Waitsfield would have 211. Once again, here the middle school, there's no change to Waterbury Duxbury schools, no change to Harwood, and so the middle schools are not aligned. It fails in that respect. It does get the schools up to scale in terms of that planning goal. Next slide, please.
I think these notes are actually pretty. I think these notes are pretty similar actually to the other K options, but it requires a classroom addition at Waitsfield and Warren, and additions at the other elementary school for program service equity, and you can look back at the rankings of these, but they're all kind of middle of the pack. None of them really stand out as being overly great or overly bad. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of the options.
Please. So this is a option B example. What you're looking at the top is the status quo. The orange is the capital renewal or deferred maintenance. The light blue is ongoing maintenance, and the green is new construction. And then the tall blue bar is the salaries, benefits, and fuels. And so um, I don't know that it looks like these might have gotten distorted, but whatever. So you can see what happens is that the maintenance budget goes up. The capital renewal budgets, and in this scenario, those are, you can see how relatively small those are compared to the salaries and benefits. So, the cost of running the district is in the neighborhood of like $40 million a year. Um, and that goes up each year. We're doing that. We're escalating that at 4%. We know some years it's more than 4%. Um, if you were to do a construction bond, the bond payment is the same. It actually goes down over time. Um, the ongoing maintenance is calculated as 3% of net replacement value, which very few districts are able to budget that much, but that goes up at 3% a year in this model. And the capital renewal, we mentioned this earlier, deferred maintenance budget is, we're calculating at 4% of net replacement value, which is per the APPA recommendations. Um, if you were to try and budget for that, that would of course go up by 3% every year. If you were to bond for some amount, then you have a fixed bond payment that actually goes down. And so we ran these two models. Can you go to the next slide? And this is what we were mentioning earlier. Over 30 years, option B saves $107 million versus the status quo option, which is about 2.8%. And so the goal is to run these cost models for all of the options, or most of the options, at least the ones that seem preferable or favorable, because what we don't know is we did the construction cost ranking, but you can see how big that bar is for salaries and benefits. That's where we think the savings will occur in some of these options, that even if they have a higher construction cost, they may overall provide the most savings to the value to the district, but we don't know that yet. So we're eagerly awaiting the modeling. Next slide, please. Yep. Yep. So, we made an assumption that themes that we talked about become the planning guidelines by which to evaluate each configuration option. And you can see that some of the options do meet those planning guidelines and some don't. And one of the questions I think for the board is, are there any other guidelines that should be added or removed? And then we're looking at 30 years for the time horizon for cost savings, because that's the length of a bond. We have the data year by year, but we're looking at that kind of time horizon, and the question we have, is that appropriate? And then we've started to have this conversation about question 3 with the committee about what options can be eliminated. I think, and are there any that should be added? Are there any that we didn't think of? I said, as long as we don't get to double A, double B, double C, I'm okay. So those are some of the kind of ongoing questions that we have. Next slide, please. And just to sum it up, we're at that vertical dashed line. We anticipate meeting with the executive committee and perhaps with the facilities committee one more time. And then what we anticipate is, we'll have the cost modeling, and there'll be, we'll put together our report for just this phase, which will talk about the options, the relative costs, and we anticipate that the board, or the committee, might make a recommendation to the board about which 3 or 4 options are favorable for further development. So now we're sorry that was a slog, but it's a lot of information and appreciate your patience. So we're happy to answer any questions you have.
Thanks, you guys. That was great. Let's see. Let's start with life. Raise your hand in Zoom if you want to ask a question.
Thank you very much. I mean, I'm blown away. Incredible work. It's a lot of analysis and the charge to come up with a lot of ideas. You definitely did that. Just on your first question, I have a couple thoughts. The themes, the one that really struck me was the idea of prioritizing the alignment of the middle schools. And I've worked in middle schools in Vermont. I've worked with the Middle School Association family. They have a pretty famous, longstanding report and set of guidelines called "Middle School is Not a Building," that downplays configuration. And research-wise, there's not good evidence actually. There's some evidence that maybe pre-K through eights work better than 6 through 8s and things like that. Essentially coming just because it's one less transition. So I would just want to know more. You kind of said like, oh, alignment of grades and opportunities. I'm not quite sure what that means. And you said there's benefits and drawbacks to each of the models currently. So I would just personally, I'm curious to understand more, and my first reaction is just that I don't think that that's that important of a criteria. And other than maybe some of the ones that had like 2 transitions, like we don't want to add more transitions across a K-12 career. So that's just one thought on that. The other one I just will mention is other guidelines that should be added, or just as I'm thinking broadly about other information that I would be interested in, is understanding more about like the broader impacts on community and potentially opportunities as well. So when I heard something like Brookside closing, I was like, whoa, that's big. And then I was also like, huh, what could that building be used for? Right? Could that be affordable housing in Waterbury? It's, possibly the biggest thing facing our state right now. Well, there's just many things, but that's obviously a big one. So trying to understand a little bit more about that kind of impact, or, the economic impacts on a community for closing a school. I assume it's going to have adverse impacts. So I know some of those are not necessarily in your direct purview, but thinking broadly as a board, obviously social impacts on a community losing a school is a big one, and it's very hard to quantify. But just that we have to keep in mind that we have to be able to look at all these factors.
That comment, and I concur. It's very important for the board, and we can help with some of that visioning, but it's very important for the board and for the community to have a conversation about what these structures become, because they're having a purpose for them and having a community that understands what the vision and what the end goal or end point might be for these structures that have served communities for sometimes for over 100 years, is an important part of communicating how we transition. So I just wanted to say I agree 100%.
Thank you. 2 questions. One that's kind of down in the mud and one that's 40,000-foot level. But if you can go to slide 11 where you list the capacities, I had a quick question on that. And I happened to pull up Ray's report from a couple years ago on building capacities, or it wasn't just on capacities, but he listed the high enrollments in each building. So for example, at Brookside, we've recently had as many as 456 students in there. And I'm wondering if there's value in looking at that historical information versus the calculated capacities, and if that might, be worth exploring further. And then from the 40,000-foot level, Um, to me, the biggest challenge that we have is that enrollment is down significantly in the last generation, right? So we have too much capacity as a district. So any solution that increases our square footage, to me, goes counter to that problem. And I'm wondering if there is a world where I'm looking at that wrong, and maybe it does make sense to increase square footage, but about maybe 2/3 or so of those options had more square footage now or in the future than we have now. So maybe thoughts on that piece of it.
So regarding the square footage, the um, the space, the education has changed over the last, you know, 20, 30, 40, pick a number of years, but the buildings haven't. There's a lot more services provided in the buildings, and they often lack that space. So what we see is that even sometimes when enrollments are going down, space needs are not going down in a linear fashion with them, because of all the different services and all the different functions, and the fact that the whole nature of how kids learn and are educated, the whole, um, there's many different pathways to learning now, and they need space for that to happen. So um, that's why we're tracking in each option the square footage and the square footage per student, because we're trying to see how can we be more efficient and still meet the educational needs.
I would add a couple of things to that. The status quo that you have now includes 4 schools in the valley, and none of those schools include all of the spaces that were included in our model, or our minimal space program. So like, suppose social emotional learning has a space, speech language pathology has a space, stuff like that. So all the options which are included in reconfiguration, they all do meet that minimal space program. So there's an increase in availability and equity of service across buildings, whereas in the status quo, only Brookside meets those requirements or gets close. Um, and after the status quo, all the reconfiguration options, they all meet those requirements equitably. So that favors the status quo because you're not meeting those same requirements. That's one aspect of it. Um, and actually, I'll let it sit there for that.
Of the capacities, we used a very simple methodology because, you can imagine working on this project, we have to stay at 40,000 feet. And, but yes, we could, you could get into it and say, okay, there's only, this classroom is being used by 2 special educators. That's not a great use of space. Let's call that a classroom, but account for their space. They each get an office that's 300 square feet, not 800 square feet. We could get into that level of minutia to really boost the capacity of the buildings and minimize the size of additions. We haven't done that yet. What we're hoping to do is at this level, with the committee's help or with their direction, have them identify which options merit further study, and then we would get into that level of detail.
That's a good point, David. In the case of Brookside, one of the reasons why our capacity doesn't match probably historic capacity is because there are what used to be former classrooms that have now been cut up into 4 or 5 offices. And so there are fewer total classrooms in the building than there probably were 20 or 30 years ago, because they've been occupied for these other services. So that's part of it. But our analysis also takes into account the actual size of the existing classrooms. So like not every classroom is big enough to hit the state max per classroom. The state says you can have up to 20 in a classroom up through grade 4, for instance, and 25 per classroom after grade 4. But in some cases, the classrooms aren't actually big enough if you use the state standard per student square foot. So like some classrooms at some of the smaller valley schools can only hold 17 or 18 students.
And then Steve, Bobby.
First of all, it was amazing because I sat in on the early budget committee meetings where we were trying to figure out some methodology, and this is so comprehensive and very helpful. I, I guess part of me was impressed by the things that had the lowest construction cost and the biggest efficiencies. And I was going to ask kind of where the committee was. So it sounds like they're not quite there yet in terms of looking at favored rankings. But I guess I had one question in the beginning. Oh, just in terms of travel times, 45 minutes for an elementary kid seems like a long time, but I don't know what typically kids are spending on the bus right now. How much time for the elementary school? Oh dear. So is there a figure that, I mean, roughly that we're using right now? How much time are elementary kids? What's the longest amount of time that kids are spending on the bus?
We don't actually know that detail right now, but the idea would be 45 minutes, right? It's around that though, 45 minutes. Okay, Steve.
Do I recall correctly that if a district school closes down, that the parents have the option of where to send their kids? Is that true or no?
The articles of agreement say that they'll be offered the option of the next closest district school, but there's other pieces that are within the discretion of the board, like grade alignment. You can realign grades within existing buildings, but that's the general. They're the two general ways you can do that as a board.
So in the options that have, say, option K for Facein, 75% go to Waitsfield, 25% go to Warren. I mean, can we enforce that?
We're looking at that geographically. I think those are, we were looking at, some of that is from who's closest to Warren, who's closest, because, Facein runs the length of the valley and touches all those towns. So I think those numbers are tweakable, right?
They're fairly, again, everything's hypothetical, but if that were the only building that were taken offline, students would, there are some students who actually live closer to Moortown, but the predominant percentage is Waitsfield.
Any other questions from the board, students, anyone? Okay. All right, you guys, thank you. That was very detailed and very helpful. I really appreciate it. And we'll be in touch about our
Very much.
favorites.
Thank you, folks. So we know it's a lot to take in and difficult conversations, and this is like anyone here old enough for Dragnet? So we're just the facts.
Trying to relay that these are hypotheticals. We are looking at all the options. So, and we couldn't do that without your help. So we appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, I blew off the students. My bad. So we're going to squeeze them in right now. Okay, students. Cindy's going to get up your report.
So the rest of the board can't hear you. But while Ashley's getting on, what I'll say is Cam gave me kind of a one sheet overview that I'll go scan and send to the board. It's a kind of it's a cheat sheet of all the options they discussed. And then I'll also send out the PDF report as well.
Those in Zoom, Dan suggested just now that we do a straw poll on the options, and we will do that in a future meeting. So if you would mark this as the presentation that you have is the place where we'd like to have you check it out, take a look, and then when we straw poll, we'll talk about each option and we'll get the board's buy-in there. Okay, and now we're going to hear from the students. Students, all right, go for it.
This is the student reports, the first one of 2025. Yay. All right, next slide. So, oh, too far. Yeah, so there's a lot happening. Not working?
Here, I gotcha.
Okay. So we have a lot of stuff happening in Harwood right now. We just had the Socrates Cafe on the 9th. It's an event hosted by the Harkness class. We did a Harkness, I think it was in October, like when, yeah. But so like students, teachers, people in the community, they all come to the library and they discuss a question that really gets you thinking. And you're not trying to find an answer, you're just trying to talk and see what other people think. And the question for this year was, how do we live now, like live in the present while still respecting the past? I went to that. It was a lot of deep thinking, a lot of talk about respecting the past and then also like living in the present, but also acknowledging that the future is happening and just trying to balance all of that. The Winter Carnival is next week. Harwood student government has been hard at work organizing it this year. Some of the activities that are planned to happen are a badminton tournament, a staff versus students basketball game, and a rail jam. All of these things will be for spirit points for each of the grades. There will also be activities that aren't like contests, like there's going to be tea and movies in the library, and then there's going to be some s'mores happening out in the fire pits over there. But yeah, it's just like it's a nice little school spirit time. It's also getting ready for Spirit Week at the end of the school year. And then another big thing that's happening is the Danish exchange program. So this coming Monday, 13 students from a Danish after school will be arriving in Burlington. These students will spend a week living in Harwood student houses. They will be attending classes at Harwood. They're going to be like going around the valley in Waterbury. They're going to be going skiing. They're going to be hiking up to a yurt somewhere, I think it's in Waitsfield, and spend the night up there. So nice little camping. And then they're going to go down to Boston and then leave. And then in April, we are going to, Harwood's going to send, I think it's 18 kids over to Denmark, and they're going to spend half the week there at the after school and then the other half at Danish host houses. I'm a part of that program. I'm not hosting anybody because there's more Harwood kids than there are Danish kids coming. But yes, looking forward to that.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, and then we have a winter sports shout out to the girls varsity basketball captain, Eloise Lilly. Last night at her game, she scored her 1,000th point, and she's the third female Harwood player to do that. So we just want to give a congrats to her. And then, yeah. What? But yeah, we also linked an article about her that Burlington Free Press wrote because she's being challenged by, she has an ACL tear and she's just playing through it and trying to get that 1,000 points. So yeah. Yeah. And then the assembly last week was our first assembly of 2025, and we went up on the stage as student reps and we just told like the students a little bit about the bond, and we were budget, I'm sorry, about the budget. about the budget and just encouraging any seniors that might not have been 18 by the presidential election to still vote so they could vote in the budget. Yeah. Yay. All you.
So this is not directly related to our school, but it partially related. H54 was introduced today in the House, which would, well, it's surrounding making all schools in Vermont phone free, and I feel like we can take partial credit for that. But exactly. I think along with Meg, I'm interning in the State House right now, so I'll be able to talk with people about that, but also a group from Harwood is going to testify for the bill and the Committee on Education. I'll keep people updated on that. Are we one more?
Alrighty. I hope we all remember Harmony DeVoe spoke at our last meeting about, oh, she's a representative from one of a club at Harwood called CARE, the Community Actions for Racial Equity Club. And we are happily announcing that we are going, as student reps, we're going to start a partnership with this club. And so at the last meeting, Harmony spoke on the new equity policy that the board has introduced. And her club came up with 4 points that she shared: educating staff on how to recognize racially motivated incidents, developing specific consequences for racially motivated incidents, students need safe and supported environments to be able to report these incidents, and that students are educated on varied cultures and the effects of discrimination, especially in life and in the school district. And so recently, Harmony spoke. We spoke with Harmony. Um, we don't have many new fresh updates because I just spoke with her Monday or last was it last Monday? Yeah, last Monday. So recently. I spoke with her recently. And we are hopefully the plan is to if some of us can attend the next CARE meeting and talk with the 5 members of CARE and their supervisor, Miss Napper, who's works in the middle school, and talk about what us as student reps can do to help them implement these 4. They called it like not expectations, but like sort of a guideline in a way. But we're starting, hopefully, gonna start to implement these, whether it's just talking about it or hosting ELOs, raising awareness in general. Mm, it- it- I'm on top of it. Yeah, so there will be updates with our partner. More and more. Yeah. So, do you guys have any questions? There's another slide, Cindy, just for questions if you want to go to it.
It's more of a comment. Like, I'm so psyched that you all are gonna do this partnership with Care. That's just awesome. And that's like, to me, like exactly what student reps can do. You know, you heard a need and you're like, that is a thing that we can impact. I mean, we had y'all helping with the bond last year, and something like that is just kind of like, it's kind of abstract, and it's how student voice really operates in there. It's just not, it's a big thing for the board, but for you all, it's just really unclear what your impact could be. But this is something that like we can't do. Like, we cannot impact the culture of your school here. Um, if there are things we can do, we need to hear that from you, but we can't like be the movers on it, right? So you heard somebody, you heard that group, and you reached out to them, and I'm just so grateful to you for that. And I'll just remind us that, the equity policy has a mechanism to try to bring in more student voice and community voice. So the policy says, the next step is to form an equity team. So a lot of these policies say, and the superintendent shall create procedures, da da da. Da. Well, this one says it's going to be a team. And so between you all and CARE and hopefully other students having a role on that team, I know Dr. Mike is really committed to that. And part of the reason the equity policy was able to move through at such a speed is because we wanted to get the policy done so that that team could be formed. And, the committee and the board just really trust Dr. Mike to like guide that work because he's committed to having you all involved as well. So just super happy about where the direction is going and huge kudos to you. Thank you.
I want to second that. I think you asked 2 meetings back, what can we do? What should we be doing? The grassroots things that you do amongst yourselves and your peers are that's the real work. I mean, you heard her, and I mean, we all heard her, and that was hard to hear that those things are happening now all the time to a certain group of students. And it's impressive that it's like that grassroots feeling, right? Like we're imagining that could happen, and now you're telling us it is happening. So thank you. And we can't wait to hear how we can help. So please keep us informed and keep good notes.
And I say ditto to both Life and Ashley and what they said about your work with CARE and getting that moving forward. But also, just in this meeting, you talked about an assembly that you ran, and you talked some about the budget. You kind of filled the kids in a little bit about where the other students were. That's student representative work, getting that word out and the places you can say. So just taking the time to figure out who was going to say what and what you were kind of going to say was an important step, I think, in the whole thing. You just spent some time with some people talking about cell phone policies, and the work that has happened here at Harwood has been largely student driven from everything I understand anyway. And your connection to the board so that the board has some understanding of what's going on, that's all a part of what you guys do as representatives to this board. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for all your work. And I'll figure out how to do your program someday.
Okay, we're going to move on to Lisa Essler, and we are going to talk about the recommended budget we're hoping to vote on and recommend.
We're just pulling up the presentation. It's also in the agenda too.
So if you want to do it, that'd be easy if you just did the presentation on your own.
I'm not on the.
What's up?
I'm not in.
Oh.
I didn't.
She's figuring it out. I just want to welcome Cindy back. She's had her knee replaced and she only missed 1 meeting. She Zoomed it, and she's been doing all kinds of things like the whole time she's been laid up. I think she's mostly been just annoyed that she was laid up. So welcome back.
I'll sign into Zoom. Oh. Yep. There we go. That's it, Cindy. Okay, well, while she's pulling up the presentation, the board guidelines, I'm just going to go through. I know we've gone over this at many meetings, but I'm just going to
run the gambit from start to finish. So the board's guidelines was a way to reduce cost per pupil. That was number one guideline. Also limit growth of year-over-year costs to 2.75%. If you put it on slideshow and go to the second slide. There we go. Also, limit our budget growth to 2.75% year over year. Continue to offer academically rigorous programming for all of our learners throughout all our schools, and staffing must be responsive to enrollment changes. Next slide. Major cost drivers, nothing new. I've shared these in the past. Special education, service transportation, up 39%. Special education services, out-of-district services, up 19%. These are all required increases. Health insurance, double digits, have continued over the last couple of years, and we were at 11.9%. Other fixed cost increases, we can go line by line. 7%. Our property and liability insurance went up. Wages of labor for both CBAs, 6.5% on average over each year annually over the three-year contract. Support staff plus 5%. Technology subscriptions, software, and supplies actually averaged 5.2%. Trash removal 5%, and utilities on average 3%. Next slide. Our revenue, I'm projecting for our revenue for fiscal year 26 has changed slightly since my last presentation. You'll see where it says special education, essential early education in fiscal year 25. The current year, we received 197, 130, and I just got notification on Monday that it has now been slightly decreased by 5,000. It's gone down 2.65%, so it's 5,220. So our revenue actually slightly decreased. So where we were projecting a 7% increase in our revenue, we're now down to 6.72. Wrong direction. Next slide. Our overall budget increase, we are sticking with the 2.75 in this plan here. Last year, you'll see in this slide deck on this page, you'll see what our fiscal year 25 approved budget was, 47.8 million. If we kept level service with assumptions, we would be at a $51.3 million budget, but with a 2.75% increase, we are looking at a 49.2 million, 275% increase, or a $1.3 million increase. And you can see the buckets of the expense categories and the detail of descriptions for each of those expense categories that rolled up. Next slide. So when you're looking at that and you have to provide the formula for the equalized homestead tax rate, again, this is estimated. The yield does not come out, the final yield does not come out until the end of spring. So that is highlighted. That could change. I changed this slide a little bit because many people had questions on the methodology formula going through it. So you'll see I added a column if you're minusing or if you're plusing or you're dividing so you can understand the equation. But overall, our education expense budget that we are proposing is $49,209,927. When you offset our offsetting revenues, we then receive, we achieve our educational spend, the money that we're asking the state to fund for our school district. And that actually is only a 2.1% year over year increase. It went up slightly because of the change in special ed, essential ed. So that is a phenomenal year over year increase for bottom line for our educational spend. I did receive version 5 for our long-term weighted average. So that is our new version 5, which we have now confirmed. It went up 1/10 of a point. So we are at 2,659.72. You take that and you divide it by our educational spend, and then you get your cost per pupil, our long-term weighted averaged cost per pupil. And our cost per pupil, we're projecting at 15,485.88. I've highlighted that in red just so you can see in comparison to what the excess spending threshold is set out for fiscal year 26. For fiscal year 26 is 15,926. If you recall, the excess spending threshold has been on hold or hiatus for the last couple of years. They have implemented it back, and it will be applied in fiscal year 26. So right now we are at 15,485.88, which is fairly close to the excess spending threshold. The yield, the preliminary yield that has come out, has been set at 8,553. That's includes the statewide adjustment in there. So it is, and I'll on a further slide down in the slide deck, I'll explain what the difference is. But right now, compared to the current year, it's a 13% decrease in our yield. And again, the yield is not finalized until the end of spring. If you work through all the calculations, you'll see, if you recall, we received a taxing capacity discount for the next 5 years. In the current year, we received a 9-cent discount. It goes down 20% over the next 5 years. What I need to do is there is a statewide adjustment of 72%. I need to adjust our taxing capacity by the 72%. So where we were projected to receive 7 cents in fiscal year 26, it goes up by the 72% statewide adjustment. So we're receiving a 10 cents taxing capacity. So prior to the adjusted, we would have had $1.81 equalized homesteads tax rate for the district, but with the statewide adjusted taxing capacity discount, we're at $1.71, which looks, because of the statewide adjustment, it looks extremely high at 17.8% increase. But that's because the yield, if you take the yield and you change the adjustment, the yield actually is up. So I want to be able to show you that this is what we talked about, smoke and mirrors before. It's now they've changed how the statewide adjustment will then be applied to the CLA. So the district tax rate is $1.71 currently right now projected. Next slide. I just wanted to share what the excess spending threshold penalty is. We talked about this at one of the last board meeting, I believe, and I wanted to be able to share an example. So the calculation for the excess spending penalty is you take the average statewide per pupil educational spend, which is PPES. You times it by 118%, then times it by the national average, the NEAP, which equals then the threshold. And they're projecting for fiscal year 26, the threshold to be 15,926. So using our current cost per pupil of the 15,486, what would happen is they would take, because I'm going to use the 15,000 as an example as the threshold for fiscal year 26, you would take our cost per pupil of 15,486. We're $486 over that threshold. This is just an example. You would then double that amount over the threshold. So it's for every $1, we're taxed $2, and that would raise our tax rate. So we're being penalized double for that amount, which is part of our homestead district tax rate, which would then apply towards taxes. I've also linked in excess spending 101. There's a good slide deck at the state, and everybody can just tap into that link. It's linked. Next slide. So then how does this look? We would take our district tax rate, and how does it then apply to each of the towns? So each of the towns I've listed, it's basically the same calculation and detail, schedule detail that I've been sharing over the years. But what I did was I went back and I added fiscal year 24 CLA tax rate and the current tax rate, and then what the projected unadjusted and what the projected adjustment is. So you'll see in fiscal year 26, where it says SACLA, that is the statewide adjustment by town. So on each of the towns, for instance, Duxbury, if you look at what they're projecting, the CLA is pre-statewide adjustment. Duxbury's pre-CLA would be 63.96% for their CLA. You then apply the statewide adjustment of 72%, then their CLA goes up to 88.39%. So you'll see there's a change with that statewide adjustment. And if you go across, you're looking at Duxbury would be looking at a reduction in taxes. Again, this is all estimated until the yield is finalized, but these are just projections and what we know today. Facein will see an increase, whereas Duxbury had a 19-cent discount from the previous year. Facein saw a large drop in fiscal year 21 of 71.1% CLA to down unadjusted would be 54.79, but when you apply the statewide adjustment, it jumps up to 75.72. But that still is a 22-cent increase in the tax rate. So they will, preliminary see an increase. Mostly all the other towns, you're seeing Moortown, because they had a recent reappraisal, you'll see a decrease of 12 cents. And Waitsfield, Warren, and Waterbury are looking at each decrease of about approximately 1 cent. Next slide. So I just wanted to be able to share taxing variable estimate takeaways. So again, our educational spend is only a 2% increase. Our long-term weighted average actually went up. It increased slightly over the current fiscal year. The homestead dollar yield, that's the new calculation. They actually, if you apply and divide the statewide adjustment of 72%, that yield actually looks like 11,879. But then they apply that then adjustment on the CLA, so it's driving the CLAs down. So it's driving it up, driving the tax rate down. Next slide. Our 4-year budget comparison in comparing it to inflation, you'll see in the current fiscal year, we had a 5.4% increase, and inflation at the time was 4.1%. On average, if you look at the averages, we don't know what 26 is projected, but it's looking between 2.1 to 2.3%, a projection, early projection. But you'll see we are pretty much in line with inflation. Next slide. Looking at our educational spend comparison over the last 3 years, fiscal year 24, 25, and 26, you'll see, again, last year we had, in fiscal year 24, our educational spend increased by 9.48%. In the current year, it increased by 4.84%, and we're projecting next year's 2.1%. Next slide. So to achieve the 2.75% increase, year-over-year increase, we had to make some tough decisions in terms of how do we get there? How do we achieve the 2.75%? So we are looking at staffing changes, a reduction of 16 to 20 full-time positions, FTEs, in student support, classroom teachers due to class size consolidations. We're looking at consolidating some classes. Central office administration and leadership. We are looking at new nurses, our consolidation of nursing. librarian and art areas where that we are overstaffed beyond the educational quality standards. And then we have a few open and vacant positions that we are willing to take offline and reduce the overall FTEs with those vacant positions. Program and services adjustments, instructional resources were reduced by $35,000. Library and technology resources were reduced by $38,000. Elimination of summer academies would be a $325,000 savings. Operational changes, we are looking at with the new transportation contract, there will be savings. We're estimating $225,000 in the transportation contract. Reduction in building operations and resources is we are achieving $135,000 in savings. Next slide. This is just sharing our our ballot language. The ballot language actually looks great in terms of our cost per pupil. So we had, in last year's warning, we did not have to include the higher spending over year. They are actually putting that back into the ballot language. So our question on the ballot would be approving our budget of $49.2 million. Our cost per pupil would be $15,485.88, which is only 1.55% higher than the current fiscal year, which looks great. Next slide. A comparison view of current year to what we're proposing our budget to be for fiscal year 26. We believe this is a very responsible budget to put forward to the board to be able to meet the 2.75% year-over-year increase. That was our charge. Next slide. I've included a lot of information in the appendix, and we don't have to go over that, but if you want to just skim through it, Cindy, we can go quickly. Understanding the new yield and the statewide adjustment, I mentioned that with the statewide adjustment, the yield is actually $11,879, and then they apply that on the CLAs when they do the statewide adjustment to each of the town CLAs. Next slide. These are just four major inputs that result and could affect the tax rates. Our educational spend, which we do have control over, the long-term weighted average LTW ADM, if that goes up over the each year, and we've actually been staying steady in our enrollment, so that helped us. The dollar yield would affect us, and again, that does not come out until the final yield doesn't come out until. And then whatever the common level of appraisal is, and this year it's being adjusted by 72%. Yep.
Just wanted to note that just got some information late this afternoon from someone who works in the tax office that they are not anticipating at this time that they're going to change the yield. So that's good news. They've been reviewing the yield to make sure it's in line with budgets. It was based on information that all finance directors and superintendents provided to the Agency of Education for an estimate. So that's up as of today. Things are always subject to change, but we were all finance directors and superintendents were all a little nervous once we started looking at the numbers, but they do seem to be holding.
That's actually great news, because when I was at my last VASBO meeting, there was discussion of possibly changing this, so that's great. We don't need to go through all these, but there's lots of information available in terms of what the common level of appraisal is, how it is with each of the districts, and then also what I included, and I did notice that I left off somehow 2025, but historical homestead tax rates by town, and I will fix this graph because fiscal year 25 is not included. In my apologies. I will go back and fix that. It's just one slide I did right before I came here. Additional resources that I've shared before. I do recommend that there's this fabulous video on how does Vermont funded schools. It's very good. You can click on those. Those are all clickable links and more important reference information. Our Vermont educational quality standards, and that's it. Questions?
Thank you. That was great for the update. Does anyone have questions for Lisa? We'll start with Steve.
Yeah, Lisa, thanks very much for your hours and hours of work on this. It does look good. So I know last year we knew what positions were being cut, the elementary world language program in particular. And this is, I guess, for you and Dr. Mike. Do we know which specific cuts we're having this year?
Just a couple of pieces of information. First of all, the collective bargaining agreement states that the district shall provide to the association a letter by March 15th. So we have some preliminary ideas, and I can talk to you a little bit about the process for that. If you remember last year, our budget failed 2 times. It passed on the third time. So we came back to the board, and that was in April when we specified what those reductions specifically were. So the process we've used, Lisa, I meet monthly with the association leadership. Lisa has been joining us since November to update on the budget. Last week, and my weeks are running together. I am right. It was last Wednesday or Thursday. Lisa and I met with the executive council of the association, which is leaders from all the buildings. We talked about a process. I shared a calendar with the association for what that process would be. What I will say is, in future meetings, we can go into more detail, but everything is fluid at this point. We received a resignation over the weekend, but we do anticipate those reductions. And when I was hired by the board almost 3 years ago, 2 weeks, I was hired to build programs. I was not anticipating reductions, statewide funding crises. So I will be the first to say, reducing budgets and positions is not something that comes intuitively. I shared with the board and the staff last year that up until last year, I never had to, in 16 years of being a superintendent, I never had to lay off a person. So these are all new things that none of us look forward to. From conversations that Lisa and I have had statewide, districts are looking at similar pieces across the state. So these are very challenging things, but we want to be transparent with our community. We also want to be transparent with our staff. So part of the pieces have been, we shared the same information last week with the association. We have met, principals have met with anyone who may be impacted. We are still working very hard that any reduction in force would not impact a teacher with a permanent contract. We are not 100% there, but we are pretty close to being able to do that through turnover, transfer, attrition. So there's general categories we can share, but they can all change tomorrow. Like I mentioned, we had a resignation over the weekend. We will anticipate other pieces. I'll share an update with the staff. If people are intending to leave, there's no requirement that they share information with us. But we're going to say the more you can share early on, the better, because once we hit the town meeting, hopefully with the work that's been done by the board and our district, that we'll see a successful budget on the first try. But if it doesn't pass, then we have to look at other pieces, and we're still bound by those contractual deadlines of March 15th notification, April 1st notification to teachers, whether or not the budget passes. The association last year waived that requirement. Jointly, we agreed that that was not the best thing to do, that we wanted to be able to give people some notice if their job may be impacted in the January, February timeframe. So what we did as administrative staff is we went through the educational quality standards. I think anyone on our team who was looking at potential reductions where we could would agree with me that there are no reductions that we wanted to see. I'm looking in the audience and seeing two of our very valued school nurses. That is an area where we used to have shared nurses prior to my tenure, and the decision was made to have one nurse per building. That is an area, though, educational quality standards says 500 students to one nurse. So they are areas that we are looking at. They're not areas that we like or want to do, but that's the situation that we're facing at least this year. I won't go into detail, but the governor, Secretary of Education delivered the preliminary overview of the plan. The overview of the plan is looking at some consolidation, going down to 5 school districts in the state, 5 school boards. That's the proposal. It has to work through the legislative process, but they're also proposing a foundation formula. So there's a lot of unknowns in Montpelier, and we have a long way to go. So what we wanted to do as a team was to meet with anyone, and we did prior to sharing those pieces with the community. And Lisa and I are happy to come back at a later time and drill down into details. But they are the areas that we're looking at. We're looking at we have some buildings where we can't reduce classrooms because we have 1 classroom per grade. And there's just no flexibility. We have some buildings, for example, last year at Brookside, there was 1 grade we reduced 3 classrooms. They're the areas that we're considering as well, and making sure that we're still within the limits of EQS, which says K to 3, K to 3, no less than 20, or sorry, no more than 20 in a class, and then 5 through 12, 25 with some caveats.
So at the last meeting, I mentioned the possibility that we reconsider 3% instead of 2.75. And I mentioned that until we see impacts, it's very hard to know what we're looking at here. We're getting closer. Tonight we've heard from nurses, and we're seeing that on the chopping block here. And I was also moved by the gymnastics piece. I mean, when we're talking 16% or $16,000 was the figure I heard. I mean, this is like pennies. I mean, this is 0.03%, or it's like it's so I would like us to think about the 3%. I feel like we're trying to make responsible decisions, and when we look at this budget, the 3% cap is what the governor had said originally. And the taxes impact that we're seeing here is not, it's not as nearly as horrible of pictures we've seen in the past. And the excess spending threshold to me is there seems to be plenty of room there. So just by my calculate, I'd be interested in hearing more about this, but it looks like we're $440 below the excess spending threshold per student. So for the number of students that we have, this gives us like over $1 million of wiggle room. So I'm not worried about that. And giving us another 0.25% from 2.75 to 3, it's something. I mean, it's $100,000 some dollars. It could save us a nurse. And so just like I'm thinking big picture, right? We don't want to cut. We've all said that. We are cutting because we are trying to be responsible, and that's part of our job. But like just to zoom out a little bit, like this idea of being fiscally responsible with education is a bit of a fabrication in my view, because there are plenty of resources to go around. The problem is they're all being held by very few people. That's the big picture to me. So the idea that we're sitting here clawing and trying to think about how to cut, and that we're put in a position to be thinking about responsibility is something that's been created so that we're fighting over these scraps. So when you think about nursing, for example, which is like a very indicative area, right? Because we are talking about healthcare, which I believe is a human right. And as was spoken about before, those folks are providing healthcare to our kids. And why? Because our healthcare system is an absolute mess. Premiums in Vermont have doubled in the last 6 years. In the rest of the country, they have not. They have not even gone up much. In the United States, we spend twice as much as any industrialized country in the world, and we have the worst outcomes. Why? Because we have privatized this stuff, because people told us that that's the way to get to efficiency. It's a complete disaster. So when we're looking at us in education, all of that privatization, all those healthcare problems, and all those continued cuts come back to our schools. And we are responsible for more in terms of healthcare and mental health care than we ever have been before. And yet we're being told we have to cut. And so right here, we're like literally facing this moral question about, could we save a nurse? And if we think healthcare is a human right, damn straight we better. Because that idea of 500 kids to a nurse, the EQS says, come on, that's ridiculous. So I'm just looking at this and I'm thinking, wow, responsible. What does responsible mean? Well, I can argue up and down that 3% is plenty responsible. And if that saves a nurse, I think it's well worth it. I think the numbers bear it out. And the last thing I'll say is that, the long-term view that we've been trying to chase here and say we got to look at many years down the road, that is completely up in the air now. With the new education plan the governor's putting out, again, in the name of efficiency. And one of the things in there is that homestead and non-homestead will have the exact same tax rate, which to me is ridiculous. People who own homes in Vermont should not be paying the same as corporations, second home, or whatever. But we don't have control over that. But the long-term view is just, who knows what's going to happen? I mean, the plan that they put out has the entire funding formula changing like 18 months from now. So for us to be sitting here cutting a gymnastics program for $16,000 or cutting a nurse who, I mean, we heard from that nurse, 50 kids in one day on Friday. And there's literal research that saves money down the line. And we're talking about the difference between 5% of kids being sent home or 11 to 18%. I mean, that's just like, the numbers show us that to me is the responsible thing to do, is to look back at 3%. So I would advocate for going to 3%. I'd vote for it right now, but if we want more information, I'd love to see the tax tables at 3%.
And Lisa and I serve at the pleasure of the board, and we do what the board requests. Lisa and I had talked about this in anticipation of this question, and the one thing I would remind people is, I know there's conversations similar to this across the state, and it's not just our local 6 towns that are impacted. If every district were to raise their budget at this point in time by $500,000, we're looking at an addition of $25 million to the education fund. So it impacts property taxes to everyone. So you have to balance. Our only advice is to balance those two pieces, because it's not just our taxpayers. When you look at only 83 cents of every dollar raised in the district stays in the district. The rest goes to other places.
JB, then Cashel.
Just a few things here. First and foremost, thank you, Light, for that. I couldn't agree more with what you said. I'm not going to necessarily, not of the opinion necessarily that we should adjust the budget. But everything you said, I thought I'm certainly going to miss you on this board and all that you bring to it. As far as the gymnastics second, so that, as Lisa just clarified with me, that is not on the chopping block for this budget. I appreciate the finances committee's hard work and thought in trying to come up with reductions that can be made in the future. So I don't, understanding that, I encourage them to go back and take a look, because I don't think this gymnastics program is viable to be shut down. We heard a lot of good testimony tonight, and with everything that's been said, I just think that needs a serious second look, and we all heard the same testimony. And then as far as reduction in nursing staff, I mean, I totally agree with Life on this one here. I had heard today the term continuum of care, and I think any reduction in our nursing staff could really be disadvantageous to the students in this community. And as Life alluded to, the mental health issues, increasing, healthcare changes all over the board, whether it's the closure of the Madrid Valley Health Center. There's a lot of things happening, and 500 students to one nurse sounds absolutely ridiculous. So I appreciate all the effort that's gone forward. I would urge you all to take a second look at that and avoid trying to cut anybody on the nursing staff.
I had a question about slide 13 under the programs and services adjustments, specifically about eliminating the summer academies. I was wondering if there are ways that we could look into, instead of just fully cutting the program, looking at a reduction or a downsizing of the program so that benefit can still exist for students while being, say, $300,000 less for the taxpayers. Would that be a possibility?
So that was a program that grew during the pandemic due to federal funding, and our recommendation is for that to sunset for this year, and our principals are looking at other ways to revive aspects of that. When you looked at the total number who participated versus the cost, we felt that it needed to be reevaluated and revamped for potentially next year for the fiscal year 27 budget.
Yes, I'll add on to that. So we've actually increased that program over the couple of years, and it was funded out of this past year in particular was funded out of our ESSER funding. So that would it would be in addition to our budget if we were to keep that, because it was actually funded out of ESSER funding.
Bobby?
Oh, I just wanted to say, Cashel, I thought that was an excellent question that you raised. And I think the explanation is they are looking at other ways to do this, but I appreciate the thought you put into that.
There's a volunteer organization in the works because it really is about tutoring, summer tutoring. Food for thought for you brainy student reps. Any more questions?
And may I also just add
Go ahead.
that we mentioned last meeting, and John Berliner talked about it. We have students who are on IEP, special education students who qualify for extended school year service, and that is still being offered per the requirements of their IEP. So there's two aspects there. So for some students, it will continue based on their educational needs.
Yeah.
Can you clarify what we're voting on related to the budget tonight? Is it just the budget language for March, or are these staffing changes and stuff like that locked in at that point?
No, we're talking about warning the budget, the number. Like we either have to do that, figure that out for today. Now life's thrown a little monkey wrench in the works. If we were to change our idea from 275, we would be looking at another meeting and that. But what we were hoping to do was push forward with this 2.75. That's what tonight is. The cuts, the exact cuts are not determined just yet. And we don't do that. That is done, that's the business of school. I mean, that is not our purview.
Other members' comments about the desire to save nursing, that would go back to our team to look at and say, are there other places that we could save that money if we went with the 2.75?
That's correct.
Something we could talk about right now. I suppose if we wanted to talk about that nursing issue, about maybe having them look at something else, we could straw poll the group. Go ahead, Lisa.
So I just calculated with if we were to just add $1 million back into the budget. So if we were to add $1 million back into the budget, except for Duxbury and Moortown, everybody would be looking at a tax increase, and we would be only $26 away from our excess threshold. Well, I just put in $1 million to see you had mentioned $1 million. I can go back, but right. So so with $1 million, that would be a 4.84% increase year over year. Okay, so I'll work on that.
to the nursing though. Should we talk about that?
I'm not prepared to talk about that this evening. And what I will say is we've had meetings, administrative meetings for the last 6 weeks. I can also share that my personal conversation with Lisa on Monday morning is as we move forward and look at other reductions, we don't know where those reductions are coming from in order to meet educational quality standards. So we can give you some more information at future times, but again, there's other reductions. There's administrative reductions. There are support staff reductions. There are classroom teacher reductions. There are other specialist reductions. So I would have to come back and go through some more information and share with you what the recommendations are. But these are the recommendations currently as they stand. Again, if we find some area of savings in the next 4 weeks, 6 weeks prior to March 15th, we're going to try to save positions. But at this point in time, with the best information we have, this is where we are.
To undermine any of that. Thank you for all the hard work you do. I just think with such a low number of nurses in the district, it's just vital to try not to cut any. So thank you for all the work you do. If there's any wiggle room to find that money elsewhere, it would be great.
And we've also engaged with the nurses on ways that this could work, not knowing that it's not ideal. So they are ongoing conversations as well.
I'm wondering, I don't know whether this is a point of order or just trying to figure out where, this conversation we've been having and what Life brought up is, passionate, and I understood it. But I also think the fiscal responsibility piece, we've talked about it as a group. We did a straw poll about where people would weigh in right now. I'm just wondering if we might want to take a look at that again to see if people are ready to vote on this budget figure that we've come up with, or whether we warrant looking at going to the 3%. Is it something we should move right now?
Why don't we, rather than straw poll, because we have several things that we're going to warn here, I think the discussion can come there if we're going to hold up. It's pretty important that we prepare ourselves. The sooner the better. So the next, do we have any more questions for Lisa before we move on to the action item? Who was that?
I'm just, is it okay to ask?
Yeah, go ahead. Ben, go ahead.
Because we're going to run into this every single time we make a cut, which is that we have people who are going to come, they're going to remind us of what they do for the district and its level of importance. And I don't think there's ever been a situation where we've looked at somebody who has come before us and said, no, you're not important. I think we make hard decisions. I think we make these hard decisions as a group, and they have consequences, and we're aware of those consequences moving forward. And what we do is we set a budget. We ask the administration, given this budget, what can you move forward with to operate the district in a responsible way? And they come back with that sort of decision. If we start getting into the second guessing, especially at this sort of stage where we, especially like last year, where we hit, what is it, like two votes that were voted down, and then on the third try we got it. We're going to start getting into a situation by which we're going to have a parade of people coming in. And then it's going to be, I think everybody's going to be rather incentivized, right, to give their heart on their sleeve to get you to change your mind so that you'll pick somebody else. Um, and and then we're back at the drawing board, to the point where it becomes heartbreaking over again and again and again, because we're forced to hear these heartbreaking stories. And it doesn't become any less heartbreaking, no matter who we choose, right? Because we can't really say, well, you're more valuable than you are, because they're all valuable. So I think it's probably best, as we did last year, to responsibly move forward, even though it's hard and even though it has consequences. It does put us pragmatically where we were. It does have consequences moving forward, but we did so in a responsible way. And it's something that our voters already are aware of. It was in all of the papers, it was in all of the media, and so they knew to expect it. So this is something of in a response, an emotional response to what was just seen, which I appreciate. But I'm sort of asking everyone to remember last year and remember that when we held firm, it was actually the responsible and right thing to do in a corporate way.
Thanks, Ben. Go ahead, JB.
Totally agree, Ben. And just for the record, when it comes to a reduction in the nursing staff, that was not about, and without offense, their jobs, but that was really about the kids. And I don't think that ratio of 500 to 1 is adequate in this current landscape. But I do agree with all that you said. And lastly, all this being said, I would not vote to change the budget. Yep.
Just a reminder too, that the board's voting on the total number tonight. We're not making any final decisions until March 15th. But again, we didn't want to get in the situation where we had last year, where we had to make reductions in late April and we postponed some of those discussions. So we wanted to be very transparent, put it out there. If something changes, we can have a conversation in the future. And if the board has priorities, we're happy to take those into consideration. But at the end of the day, I have to make a proposal that meets educational quality standards. I don't like the numbers. I don't think it's right, but that's what the State Board of Education has put in statute. So that's I have to adhere by those. I can't say, boy, on average, I want to have a third grade class at 26. I have to stay within the parameters that were given, and that's where we are currently with our numbers. We can come back and revisit and have conversations later. Hopefully, there may be some changes, but at this point in time, we're giving you an honest assessment of where we are as of January 22nd.
I just want to note before we decide, the nursing thing is important, but I think to me that's it's emblematic, right, of the whole situation, which is that we are cutting to the absolute bone and beyond. So if we were to say actually 3% is the number, I'm not sure the nurse thing would be the thing that would be restored, but I trust the administration that they would figure out what that would allow us to do. And if it was something other than nursing, then I bet it's pretty damn important, because just knowing that piece is really, really scary. So what I'm saying, take the nursing thing out of it, is just when we look at this number, to me, it's arbitrary. And when we set that number, we had half of us wanted 3 and half of us wanted 2.5, and we came to a compromise. But at that time, we did not have a ton of information. We did not have a tax rate. We had no idea what the impact would be. So I am advocating to take a beat and to not stick to our guns on a number we came up with months ago without the information we have now, and reassess and be able to compare 2.75 to 3%. 3%, very solid number. Half of us were there a while ago. The governor said it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. and look at what is the impact on taxes. What I would be very interested to know what other districts are doing. If the rest of the state is doing 3% and above and we end up at 2.75, that does not feel good to me. So there's a lot of data that I would like to look at to be able to make that decision really carefully. And it's quarter of a percentage point. It doesn't sound like a lot, but again, by my calculations, that's over $100,000. So this is a position, or whatever the administration decides to do with it. I don't have to live and die on the nursing thing. But when we're making these tough decisions, I imagine another 100,000 is going to be incredibly crucial for student well-being and success. So I just would say we already have a meeting on the books for next week, and I'm going to advocate to come back to the table with some more data to make our final decision.
Okay, Life has made his case. We have warned an action item to vote on the budget that we are to vote to warn this budget, among other things, but that is the first one. So can you bring up a tally sheet, please?
And just some information, I asked Lisa what going to 3% would be. It would be an additional $119,000. So in context, that's probably with teacher benefits and salaries. If you're taking a teacher, it's probably one person.
Thank you. That's good context.
1.5. It could be. It depends on who you hire.
Tally sheet. So each one of our action items has a separate vote. The first one is to vote to warn this budget. The first one in your list, approve and warn the budget for town meeting. Yep, can you put it up there? So depending on how we vote here, we'll also determine whether we need another meeting next week.
Ashley, do we need to make a motion? Or it's all right?
Hold on a second.
Can I just ask a question before we move forward here?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Ben.
Before we add, if we are to go from 2.75 to 3 as an arbitrary number, and if we are to add one more position, given the we had sort of prepared ourselves for the 5 years of cuts that we are sort of in the middle of right now. How likely is it that the one person that we would be sort of adding in or saving would be able to retain the following year or the next year after that or the next year after that? I'm just wondering how permanent this position would be that we would be changing everything for.
Corrected me. It would probably be 1.5, and it could save a position. But again, we had talked last week that this is still January 22nd, and Lisa still has preliminary numbers in her budget with other costs. So she could get one piece of information, and I'll let her discuss this, that could make sure that applies to operational, not staffing.
I mean, we're looking at a bottom line number. So the categories within that bottom line that we vote on can change. So that's why, we're in the fluctuation. In fact, we're going to be looking at it tonight for retirements. Things could change all the time. So those numbers are a flux. It's a budget. So what we're looking at is a budget estimated on what we know today, and that's the numbers. And again, it can change. This past weekend, we had a resignation. So things could, and as administrators had discussions, people go home, think about it, things we could have more resignations, more retirements, it's, which would help. Mhm.
Answer the question from Ben. We're looking at multiple years of reductions if nothing changes at the state level, which I see that will happen. Our taxing capacity discount goes down by 2 cents every year, so we're one of the highest spending districts in the state. We're into a number of years of challenges.
My apologies. I'm sorry. I didn't answer that question. So you're right. And we are amongst the 119 school districts. We're the 14th highest cost per pupil.
I think at one point, I heard us talking about, Lisa mentioned what going up that extra quarter of a percentage point would do to taxes in 3 of our 5 towns. So 3 of our 5, I think, isn't that what you said? I thought that's what you said.
Tax.
Let me still just make this point anyway that I want to make, is that I think that we certainly have a huge responsibility to our kids and to be providing the best education we can possibly provide. That's within the context of the communities we live in. There are a lot of people who can't afford the taxes they have now, and I think that the image of 3% versus 2.75%, which is not a huge amount of money, as we've been saying, is one that shows some care for what's happening to people in our communities, with the people that come up to me who can't stay in their houses, who are going to have to leave their house or whatever. All of that whole aspect of our decision making is critical for me. And just so you all know, I've spent 50 years as a professional. About half of them have been in community health. I was a school nurse here at Harwood for 6 years, and I also have an education background where I was a principal for a long time, and all of those things. I have been battling for 50 years for what you just talked about, life earlier, the business of us giving up our essential critical social services for kids and for old people both for so many years, having to make these stupid decisions that will bring me to tears, quite frankly. And I have to go for 2.75 for the people who might not be able to manage their homes. They will, but they might not be able to. And what we do, it's not right. It's wrong, and it's not the way our society should be working. I don't know what to say about it, but I can only say that that's sort of where I come. And I appreciate what you said. Thank you. And
Going to vote now. It's a roll call for this. We're going to make the motion now. Yep. I mean, we're going to make the motion and then we're going to vote on this particular, which is that one.
Right.
Oh, more discussion. All right.
After the motion.
Okay. Do you want to make the motion? Yep. Approve to warn. Thank you.
I will move to approve to warn the budget for town meeting for 2026 for $49,209,927.
And I second it.
Seconds. Discussion? Life?
So I'm going to make the last ask that we hold off on this for a week, and we ask for very specific data so that we can look at the comparisons so that we know what we're voting on. So what you just said, Cindy, I take that very seriously, and that's why I asked for the tax table. I would like to be able to say, 2.75 versus 3%. That means if you have a median home in Duxbury, you're going to save $1 less per month. I want to get down to that level so that when that person says, I don't like 3%, I say, it's only $1 difference, and it saved us a nurse, or it saved us whatever the administration says they're going to do with that extra $119,000. It saved us a point and a half. So to me, the 3%, 2.75, we have that chart that shows how much our percentages have gone down over the last 3 years. It's huge. It's still a big change from what we've been doing in the past. And think another crucial piece of information here is what other districts are doing. So we're 14th now. My guess is that 2.75 or 3, we're going to drop in that ranking. When I just Googled it, what do I see preliminary in other districts? I see Montpelier's proposing 5.8% increase. I see Southwest Tech is up 6.99%. I know that the Career Center where we send our students is up double digits. It's over 10%. So 2.753, when we're clawing at this thing, I want to know more. And so I just, again, advocate that we vote no on this so that we give ourselves a week and we have some more data that we can look at in comparisons. We might end up in the exact same place, but to me, that's doing our due diligence instead of sticking with the number that we came up with before we even had access to this information.
I agree with you, Life. That's a great point. I'm going to follow you along on that and vote no on this as well.
Okay, let's do this voting. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Life. Let's start with the kids.
Hold on, sorry. If I may, just for a quick clarification, is Lisa able to get us those numbers by next week for a meeting?
Yep, right now.
She has them now.
Okay, cool. Just double checking feasibility.
Okay, we're going to take the vote and then we'll come back to that discussion piece about that. So let's see. Starting with Celia.
Stain.
She's a little hoarse and she's abstaining. Ellie.
That's casual next.
Oh, sorry, Cashel. Ellie.
Abstain.
Grady. You guys are allowed to vote. You understand that, right? Like you vote to get
we
your
know we're
opinion,
allowed to vote, but
you're not going to. Okay,
We're
just checking. All right, Bobby,
Yes.
JB, not right now, later. We're doing it.
Oh, thank you. Give me a second.
You can abstain as well.
I just want to see the numbers. Well, she's got them here.
We'll vote and then we'll, I
I'm gonna
don't know the
abstain.
answer. JB abstains. Cindy? John Young?
No.
Come back one. Elizabeth?
Yes.
Ben?
Yes.
Corey's not here. Yep.
Take him out.
No.
Tori?
No.
Can you scooch it? So see the names. Danielle is absent. You can. There we go. Thank you. Corey's absent. Then we went to Life. Then we went to Danielle is absent. Life is in. He was a no. Tori was a no. Danielle is out. Mike Bishop.
Yes.
Dan Rossioli.
Yes.
Steve Rosenberg. So what does that do?
So do you zero out if somebody's not here?
No, you just look at the weighted yeses. You don't have to zero out because that should calculate to the weighted yes.
So we don't have, so 49.20 doesn't pass, right? 50%, we need 50. Unless I vote.
Correct, unless you vote.
What was that? What did he say? What? I didn't hear what he said.
I said correct, unless you vote.
You
Yeah.
can break the tie.
I am going to vote yes. Absences and abstentions. That passes, right? 66.24. Okay. So that will pass. And I'm sorry, but that I feel strongly in the same way that Cindy does, that we have a bigger audience that we need to consider, and that's who we work for. You know. So, okay. On that happy note, we have a couple other votes to do. Yeah. Okay, please bring up the following, yep, which is to approve the date and time and location of the annual meeting. It's the night before the March 3rd at what time?
So we have another vote with the warning, which talks about the budget. So Lisa was going to pull up the other tax tables if the board wants to see that. And I will also say,
Yeah.
on behalf of Lisa and me, we appreciate working for this board. We appreciate coming and having really hard discussions. And we always say that we're happy that we don't have a board that rubber stamps either way, that these are hard decisions. They're not something that we want to do. And I think Lisa and I are, and Shannon, who's sitting over there, are proud to work for this board.
Well, none of this is hard. None of this is easy. It's all hard. You know, somebody's always going to lose in whatever choice it seems we make these days. Okay, so can someone please make this motion?
I move to approve the date, time, location of the annual meeting, March 3rd, 6 p.m. at Harwood Union High School.
Second from JB. Then does anyone object or abstain from this vote? This is just nuts and bolts about the night before our meeting. We have the final informational meeting for the public right here. No objections or abstentions. That will pass. The next one is to approve the annual meeting warning, which is, did you, in there? Hold on.
Huh.
Warning is the first one. Wait, back toward the top at the front.
Somebody is not.
This was approved by the attorney earlier today, so we just updated the access, so you may have to refresh.
Okay.
2026. Moderator is I got him, Rick. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, here it is, the language.
And Lisa and I had to go through, we went through this carefully again, and I forgot from last year that we list 2 days, March 3rd and March 4th, and just the explanation for that, in the old days, you would vote at the actual annual meeting on the budget.
March 3rd.
But now that it's done by Australian ballot, you hold the annual meeting, and technically the meeting is not suspended, but the meeting is recessed until the next day when you vote by Australian ballot. So that's why it lists the 2 dates.
Okay.
Okay, this one is to approve the annual meeting warning for March 4th, 2025, and Rick Rayfield is going to be our moderator, and he has agreed to do that. 4th is 3 and 4, because we're doing 2, right?
Right. Because the annual meeting is held at 6 o'clock, then it's recessed for the vote on the next day.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
That's all right. You were typing.
Does someone want to make this motion?
Move to approve the annual meeting warning for 2025, March 3rd and 4th, 2025, with Rick Rayfield as the moderator.
Second for someone? Do we have a second? Steve seconds. Does anyone object or abstain from this vote? I don't. I didn't hear that. Go ahead. Okay, not hearing any or seeing any, that will pass. The next one is approve announced tuition. What is the tuition?
The announced tuition is what we charge to students who attend from districts that do not have operating schools. The Granville Lisa can share more, but because of some changes, the number is the same as last year, but there's always an adjustment by Agency of Education on this. So this is so that we have an amount that we can charge for students who attend from other school districts.
2025, 26. And do we have the actual number to put in there?
The actual number is K through 6 elementary would be 19,743. Okay, sorry. K through 6 is 19,743. And 7 through 12, secondary, is 22,340. And I'm recommending that to be the same as the current rate. And there's always a true up. So we just trued up 24's rate in this past December. So there's always a true up a year after. So, but because of the reductions over the last couple of years, I'm recommending the same rate.
All right. Go ahead, Dan.
Just confused by what allowable versus announced is and why we don't have allowables for the last couple of years.
Because allowable, we don't get the allowable number for 25 until next year. So what they do is the AOE looks at our expenses and what actually is allowable. So we have to project our tuition for next year based on our budget. And then they go back and AOE pulls all my expenses and looks at actual expenses. So that's why this past December, we just trued up fiscal year 24's. And we had to make some, you'll see our announced tuition for 24 was 19,168 for elementary, but I had to go back and give money back to districts because they overpaid. So what happens is there's a true up. AOE looks at my actual expenses, and because we've had a reduction in 25, that's why I'm recommending that we remain the same.
The board had to approve the announced tuition before the final budget was passed in April 30th.
We're ready for the motion?
Just finish that number. 743. Okay, Bobby, you're going to make that motion?
Okay, I move to approve the announced tuition for the fiscal year 2026. K through 6 would be 19,743, and the grades 7 through 12, 22,340.
Do I have a second? JD seconds. Does anyone have an objection or abstention from this vote? Not hearing any or seeing any, that will pass. The next is to authorize the superintendent and the finance director to accept retirements from 3 teachers with 25 plus years of service per Article 17.4, early retirement incentive of the collective bargaining agreement between the HUUSD and the HUEA. Okay. Does someone want to make that motion, Steve Rosenberg?
Okay, if I can read it. I authorize, oh, it's right here. No,
Move to.
yes. I move to authorize the superintendent and finance director to accept retirements of 3 teachers with 25 plus years of service per Article 17.4 early retirement incentive of the collective bargaining agreement between HUUSD and HUEA.
Okay, and Dan seconds that motion. Do we have any objections or abstentions to to passing this? Anyone? Not hearing any or seeing any, that will pass. Okay,
Ashley,
go ahead.
can I make the motion?
Yes, here's our add-on amendment motion that Steve's going to make for us about our public engagement dates that are imminent. Go ahead, Steve.
I move to approve the schedule of community budget information meetings hosted by the HUUSD board Tuesday, February 4th, the Zoom meeting from 7 to 8:30. Tuesday, February 11th at the Joslin Library in Waitsfield from 3:30 to 5. Tuesday, February 25th at the Black Cap Cafe in Waterbury from 4 to 5.
We have a second from JB. Does anybody want to object or abstain from that? Not hearing any or seeing any, that will pass. And on that note, anyone who wants to participate, I know that me and Steve and Lisa and Mike are all going to be there. Probably Bobby, probably Cindy, but we'd love to see some more board members. That's always good at either. And what about you teenagers? You know, what are you doing with your free time? That sounds like Black Cap. We could have coffee, you know. It's good stuff. Get some croissants, you know. Okay. All right. Yeah, we are doing really well here and it's getting late, so let's finish up. The last thing we have is the consent agenda. It includes approving the minutes from 1/8, our meeting on 1/8, and to approve the warrants from 1/7 for $1,045, and then on 1/15 for $577,793.98, and for a total amount of $578,839.81. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
All right, Bobby, so I will take it from JB, and Bobby, you want to second that?
Yep.
All those in favor of passing the consent agenda, say aye. Aye. Okay. Okay. Ellie is really excited about that consent agenda. All right, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn then.
Do we have to discuss item 9?
I take that back. We have to, we were potentially having a January 29th meeting if we had not just passed our budget to warn. So we are, unless we have a good reason, we are not having the extra meeting next week. Is everyone all right with that? We don't have to vote on it. It's just an it's right. She's like, I don't have a tally sheet for that. Don't worry. Okay, so we're going to discuss that we're canceling that meeting, and we are. All right, with that motion to adjourn, we are adjourned.
Motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn.
Seconded, and all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
For Carol, the meeting ends at 9:21. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.